In the window of a passing train, she saw her husband and daughter. The truth was monstrous. There was a dim light in the old fortune-teller's house. It was rumored in the village that the fortune-teller had long ago turned 100 years old, but she still did not leave her craft. If the rumors about the centenary were true, the grandmother did not look her age at all. Her eyes were full of life. Her fingers nimbly lit candles and laid out cards. She looked intently at the photograph the night visitor held out to her. It showed a happy family, mom, dad, and daughter. "They're alive. Alive. Heh heh heh," smiled Grandma after a long silence. "I can see they're alive. And so are you, granddaughter." "You're wrong," Selena shrieked. "I buried them a year ago. I came here to have you confirmed, yes, dead, drowned, lost, so that I could live again. We'll at least try it to try. And you're a charlatan, that's what you are." "Alive is alive," Grandma said with a smile. "It's a terrible sin to bury the living. You'll never be able to wash it off, my dear." Her throat tightened with indignation. Her anger seemed to choke her with its fingers. Her shoulders shook with sobs. For a whole year, she could find neither truth nor peace. At that moment, she even raised her hand so that the woman wanted to hit the old woman. But the fortune-teller did not kick out the angry guest, but put her hand on Celine's shoulder. "In this village, they say I'm 100 years old," she whispered. "They lie, of course. All people lie. When Grandma Juliana first came here, decades ago, she was already old. In just a few weeks, she had a nice house made of huge logs, a bathhouse for her body, and a small altar for her soul. And then a string of people came here. Some are looking for relatives, others for missing objects, and others for themselves." "I'm sorry," Celine whispered, removing the old woman's hand. "When they were gone, my whole life turned upside down. I feel like I'm in a bad dream all the time, and I can't open my eyes." "Don't apologize, granddaughter," Julienne replied. "I've seen it all. I've seen war, and pestilence, and famine. I've seen parents bury their children. Do you have a gift? The ability to see?" the guest asked. She wanted so much to hope that the old woman was right, but deep down she doubted the truth of her words. She wanted to know more. "No gift," the witch doctor exhaled. The late-night conversation was beginning to wear her down. "You see bodies, and I see corporeal ones beneath them. They shuttle between us, swarming, not like flies, but like birds, or like clouds. Are they spirits? Ghosts?" whispered Celine in horror. "You say spirits?" the grandmother replied. "I say helpers. What makes you think they're alive? They've been searching for them. Not for 3 days, not for a week, but for a month. I looked for them myself, personally. I looked everywhere. I looked at everything, my God, everything. It was so scary. And you just looked at the photo and you saw it. How is that possible?" The grandmother sighed. She was beginning to lose patience, which is rare at her age. "How do you explain to a blind person what the sun looks like? You can describe the shape, color, warmth, but it would still be a pale shadow of what the sun really looks like." As soon as she looked at the photo, she saw the whole picture. Deception, betrayal, and true love. "I'm not 100 years old, granddaughter," yawned the fortune teller. "I'm not 100, no." "Please help me," Selena whispered. "Help me. I'll owe you for the rest of my life." "How would it quite help, eh?" Grandmother Juliana suddenly laughed in a hoarse voice, and her laughter made the guest feel frightened. She was reminded of the old women who used to scare naughty children. They invite you into their house, but there is no way out. Selena jumped up and rushed to the door. The sudden movement extinguished the candles, and the room was plunged into darkness. The guest ran through the old woman's house, fumbled for the entrance to the corridor, and it was a long praline. She kept running, fumbling with her hands on the walls in search of a handle. But no, only the endless surface, the relief of the huge timbers of which the walls are made. Suddenly a candle was lit in the distance, like a lone star in the sky. The guest obediently returned to her grandmother, her table, and the maps. "How long are you going to run around?" The fortune teller asked sternly. "You'll scare away all my helpers. Don't think you're the only one who's scared. The helpers can sense things too. And worry, you're scaring them, granddaughter, scaring them. It's not good." Selena's hands went cold. It seemed to her that she would never get out of this terrible house, where she had come of her own free will. She would wander in the dark, looking for a way out, or maybe Juliana's grandmother had other plans for her. The old woman kept smiling, and the sight of it sent chills down her spine. "I'm sorry," the guest whispered. "I apologize for calling you a quack. You're not like that, no. You're the real thing, the real thing." "A witch?" the fortune teller said, and then she moved as sharply as if she'd flown across the table. Selena could have sworn that the old woman's face moved toward her separately from her body. "Even so," the guest replied defiantly, "I don't care who I go to anymore. I just want to know the truth, and I don't need anything else." "So I'm telling you the truth," Julianne sighed. "Your husband and your daughter are alive. But the truth, you won't like the truth. The truth will disappoint you, granddaughter." The fog was suddenly gone. Selena looked at her phone, 2 o'clock in the morning. In front of her is a tired grandmother who was old before she even came to this village. And her, Selena, with her eternal skepticism. If she wasn't ready to believe the fortune teller, why did she come? Why had she waited her turn in the gazebo for days? She certainly didn't have an answer to those questions. "You shouldn't have buried them," Julian said. "I shouldn't have. It's a great sin, granddaughter." "How do you know?" Selena wondered. "I didn't say that. I see that the coffins are standing, and the wreaths and lamps have been lit," the fortune teller explained. "But the coffins are empty, and the earth does not accept them." Selena thought her grandmother had a rare gift indeed. That spring, when she had received the death certificates and organized the funeral for her husband and daughter, the ground was really frozen and couldn't be dug up. The ceremony was strange and long. She had never been to the cemetery since then because she didn't believe in it. "What am I to do?" she pondered, wiping away her tears. "If I leave everything as it is, I'll be tormented. And if I start looking, will I be disappointed?" "Better disappointed than agonized," Julian smiled, the demonic light glinting in the corners of her eyes again. "Because the truth is very interesting." "Where do I look for them, grandmother?" Selene asked, wiping away her tears. "I'll tell you all about it," nodded the old woman. To the guest's surprise, all the old woman's teeth were in place. "Go to the station." And as Selene listened to the woman, the hairs on her head stood up. Every expensive hotel has its own fragrance, which should evoke the most pleasant associations with the place. A clock that shows the time in different time zones is a must. This way, the value of the place is immediately increased, and also fresh apples or candy at the reception desk to make the guest feel at home. The hotel, where a handsome man and a little girl entered, had all the trappings of hospitality. "Good afternoon," he said with a slight accent. "We booked a room. I'm not sure I filled in all the fields on the website correctly." "Oh, that American language. What's your name?" the girl at the counter asked helpfully. "Nicholas," the man replied with a smile. "Nicholas Crass. I am traveling with my daughter." "Let me see. Yes, Mr. Nicholas, the registration is valid. Welcome to our hotel. Are you Austrian?" the hotel employee asked with interest. "Oh no, not at all." Nicholas waved his hand. "We're ethnic Americans. We live in the Czech Republic now. I have a small business there." "What brings one to the US?" the woman wondered. "Oh, unfinished business," the stranger explained. "You know, life is so interesting you have to keep looking back. It's useful. Only then you realize that time has passed, and if you don't look back, it will have been wasted." The woman stood with her mouth open. The guest literally charmed her. such a caring and intelligent man, traveling all alone with a little girl. She looked to be about 6 years old at most. She wanted so much to talk to the stranger some more, to have a cup of coffee or better, a glass of wine. It was as if he read her thoughts, moved as close as the counter allowed, and said confidentially, "Maria usually falls asleep around 10 o'clock at night. Knock on my door twice. I'll come out and we'll take a walk. Maybe show me your hotel or your soul. You have such deep eyes. I can tell you're a wonderful person." The hotel employee blushed. It seemed she had never been complimented in her life, especially such nice men. Such, but ethnically American, with his own little business. Maybe there would be a job for her, too. On the one hand, she adored New York, her hometown. On the other hand, she wanted to see the world, or at least Europe. "You know," the girl whispered, "my name is Barbara. Just Barbara to my friends." He only smiled in response. It seemed that the guest was doing it out of politeness, but it turned out to be very warmly European. But his eyes, they had the same dark color as the winter forest that came up close to the hotel on one side, and just as cold. As if he had nothing to do with her warm laughter. She felt like she should say something, but she couldn't find the words. "Here's the card," Barbara said. "Your room, with a crib. Just as you ordered. You're on the 3rd floor, Mr. Nicholas." "Thank you very much," he replied in a deep, clear voice. "It's so nice to be back in the motherland. I adore the United States. Nowhere else in the world are there such charming women and such hard workers." In the commotion, she had completely forgotten to ask Nicholas for his passport. The rules were strict now. The data a guest gave during electronic registration had to be checked and immediately forwarded to the police. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to call the man. She'd better go to him at 9 o'clock at night and remind him about the documents. Nicholas was already walking away, holding the hand of his little daughter. They had only one small suitcase on wheels. Barbara almost decided to call the man under some plausible pretext. But then several guests came to the counter, a whole group of travelers. They were back in their hometown. He ordered dinner directly to the room and didn't want to go outside. As the girl fell asleep, there was a knock at the door. He was not mistaken. The porter with the beautiful name of Barbara could not resist his charms. "I've been waiting for you," he said in a voice that made her want to throw herself into his arms. "All my life?" Barbara asked hopefully. "Yes," Nicholas whispered and kissed her gently on the cheek. "The best acquaintances are always casual. You won't have a problem spending some time with me, will you?" "No," the girl smiled. "I've already changed. I can do whatever I want." "I'm glad I met you too, Nicholas." "Please, Barbara," asked the American Setch. "Let's use the first name. I feel like I've known you all my life." Had she known how this encounter would end, she wouldn't have hesitated to rush back behind the counter. "This is crazy. Real crazy," Selena thought as she stood on the platform. Along with the pre-dawn mist, the magic had dissolved, and the inconsolable widow suddenly realized what foolishness she had wasted a whole week of her life on, along with the crumbs of her last money. First, she had taken a bus to Washington, and then spent 24 hours on a train. Then she hitchhiked to the village where Grandma Juliana lived, the legendary Grandma Juliana. After 2 days of waiting, the old woman finally deigned to receive her deep into the night. By this time, Celine's back ached, because for 2 days in a row, she had to sleep in the gazebo on some ridiculous tourist mat. There was not just a line for Julian, but a pilgrimage. "You're lucky," the young man who had set up a tent on the property told her. "I've been waiting for 2 weeks, and I may have to spend another month here." "What are you waiting for?" asked Celine. "I want to learn," the boy replied. "I have a gift." "Do you want me to tell you about you? Your name is Selena, you're from New York." "Well, let's just say I told you that yesterday." "Good," nodded the pilgrim. "You came here to find the killer, but we both know that the real killer is you." The strange guy who discovered the gift of clairvoyance stayed in the tent, and the inconsolable widow had the strangest night of her life. These events now seemed like a dream. Could something like this really happen? Deep down, Selena knew she had to get her head on straight. That since she had suffered such grief, she had to move on. There were still no options. I must live, the woman said, to live for myself and for the memory of them. But is that possible now? The most surprising thing is that Selena, who has been interested in magic and esotericism all her life, had never even heard of Grandma Juliana. But she clung to her as her last hope to make sense of the misfortune that had befallen her family. During the reception, it had indeed seemed to her that the old woman possessed fantastic powers. But now, in the selenium of the day, everything that had happened was doubtful. At the psychic's behest, she must go to the place where the whole story had spun from, to her hometown, where Selena had met the love of her life, experienced the joy of motherhood, and then the grief of loss. Although it had been over a year since she lost Maria and Michael, the wounds in her soul were taking their time to heal. Who knew that an ordinary vacation trip to Chicago would turn into such a terrible tragedy? It was all Michael's fault. He couldn't sit still in one place. He was in some kind of permanent movement, always ready to go somewhere, to do something and create. Why didn't I go with them? The woman questioned. Why didn't I go missing too? Selena couldn't make sense of her feelings and couldn't figure out whether she missed her husband or her daughter more. Probably both. In the days of her misfortune, she dropped everything and flew to Chicago. She traveled to every hospital, cemetery and morgue, visited dozens of offices. It seems that for the month that she spent by the sea, not even once did not even sleep a wink. All in vain. Michael and Maria had vanished into thin air. Why should she go back to New York? Only recently Selena had fled from this city on the Neva in shame and despair. In her heart she realized Michael was gone and so was Maria. Along with them, her quiet life and sleep and rest flew away. The search required a lot of money. She had to mortgage the apartment. This sum was spent on private detectives, lawyers, clairvoyance, all in vain. She couldn't show herself to her parents either. Her mother still blamed her for letting her granddaughter go on vacation alone with her father. Who knew you could disappear without a trace in Chicago? But there was one thing that did give her hope. After all, neither husband nor daughter's bodies were ever found, which means they might have survived, so there's still a chance. The car Michael had rented before he died had its front windows open. He must have fought to the last man, Selene thought. What a man! If they had left the car, they might have survived. After the incident, she was horrified to learn that such stories of cars being swept out to sea were not uncommon. She just never thought something like this could happen to her family. Until the last moment, she believed in the best. At the provincial train station, she saw the same guy who had spent so many days in a tent waiting for an audience. Selena turned away, but he had already spotted her and started waving. He ran up, despite his weighty backpack. "Hello," he said. "What, are you coming back?" "Yes," Selena nodded. "I'd like to be alone." "Can you imagine what my grandmother said?" The boy continued, ignoring her words. "She says I don't have any powers." "You quack. Probably just afraid of competition." "What did she tell you?" "It's nothing," Selene replied and waved her hand. She still hoped that Michael had simply lost his memory and that Maria was too young to tell her anything about herself, and that they would meet again. Her mind told her to just accept the loss and move on with her life. She was still young. She could still have a new family, children. But the pain of loss seemed unbearable. Almost all the way to DC, she was entertained by this strange guy, talking about how he'd felt different since he was a kid, that people didn't understand him and were afraid of him, that he could read minds and see the future through his hands and eyes. Selena even agreed to let him read her fortune. For that he had to sit on the side. And a few stations before Washington. A vision, he said suddenly, and the guy's eyes really did turn glassy. Seeing your world changing. How what you think is true becomes a dream. An officer with gold epaulets comes out of a glass door and takes you prisoner. Selena laughed, so amused by this performance. Her grandmother had been right. The traveling companion had no powers. What's his name, by the way? Waking up, the boy pretended to be very confused. He gathered his things, threw a huge backpack on his shoulders, and jumped out of the train. Selena smiled even wider. It wasn't until she got off at the train station in Washington, D.C., that she suddenly realized why this young psychic had decided to run away. And the realization of the truth made her want to cry. For the fourth day in a row, Barbara flew with happiness. She'd never left the walls of her home hotel. Why should she go home when she had a family of her own? Almost her own. After all, in her 30s, she was not even married. Even a serious relationship seemed fantastic to her. Maybe it had something to do with her temperament. Barbara did not know how to demand or even ask, but could only hint. Maybe her loneliness was due to her work. 12-hour shifts completely deprived her of strength. And of course, one could always meet an interesting man for a one-night stand in a hotel. At first, she thought it was something shameful, but then she accepted it. After all, a fleeting relationship is better than no relationship at all. Still, her soul was still dreaming, if not of a prince, then at least of an interesting man who would take her away. It's impossible to have a relationship in this city, Barbara complained to her friends. Everyone is married, a drug addict, a gambler, or a cheapskate. I don't know which is worse. They just shrugged their shoulders. Everyone she had studied with years ago at the hospitality college had husbands and children. And some even had second-circle families. And only Barbara had had no luck on the love front, with only setbacks and defeats. Now that was about to change. Nicholas turned out to be a terrific man. Intelligent, caring, well-read. It's as if he came from another reality. His daughter was incredibly well-mannered and polite. She dressed herself, washed her own clothes, and generally behaved much older than her 6 years. On the second day, Barbara replaced her new family's room, taking advantage of her opportunities. Nicholas was now living in an apartment with 2 rooms for the same money, and in one of them, they could spend the night together without the risk of embarrassing the girl. Barbara had to leave the room at 6 in the morning so that no one would notice them together. The hotel used to have its own security service, but the coronavirus and the tourism crisis that followed had forced the management to cut costs. Barbara knew the cameras on the floor were just for show, so she wasn't afraid of being exposed. Harry, a hotel owner in historic New York City, upon learning of the affair, would describe her behavior this way. This is inconsistent with the high standards of our institution. It is unacceptable to engage with customers. On the other hand, if the guest made the first move, you should have politely declined or quit the hotel. Barbara could hear her boss's voice in her head. Luckily, Harry was visiting his brainchild less and less often and was busy with other projects. The other employees, if they noticed Varia's unusual activity, didn't pay much attention. And who would judge her? Sophia, her replacement, who, because of the frenzied pace of work, also had a troubled personal life. Or the cooks and bartenders, who were changing at an unbelievable rate. The main question on Barbara's mind was how long this fairy tale would last. Would Nicholas take her with him to the Czech Republic? Or would he buy an apartment here, move in, and the 3 of them would live together like a real family? When she had a day off, she decided to give Nicholas and his daughter a tour of New York. She took them through the streets of the city. They saw the Statue of Liberty. "Here, it's the Statue of Liberty," she said. Then she showed them her favorite places, not the parade routes that tourists often take. Her favorite canteen, where she could taste wonderful food without paying a lot of money. I wanted to show him the room I rented with my girlfriend, but I was afraid. What if he liked it better? Nicholas was gorgeous, and she fell in love like she'd never fallen in love before. But his eyes, there was a sadness in them, a tragedy, and every day Barbara was closer to finding it. The girl sometimes withdrew into herself, and when she called to her, there were tears in the children's eyes. Nicholas, when Barbara had once casually said something about Mary's mother, had gotten all tense and asked to change the subject. It was obvious that the charming Setch didn't have a wife. At least not now. Of course, Barbara would have liked to know the truth, but curiosity wasn't that strong. If it's a family secret, if it's not customary to talk about it, let it be. Someday they'll tell it themselves. The young woman was more interested in another matter. Sooner or later Nicholas would finish his business in the United States, and then what? It was necessary to hint that she might be useful in Europe. She was learning German and French. She could take care of the girl while he was at work. But having this conversation and getting over herself seemed unrealistic. How could she get over herself? How to transcend this natural modesty that almost broke her life? In the evening, when Nicholas had put the girl to bed, he went outside to see her. The two of them walked to the coffee shop next door and got themselves drinks. How long had it been since Barbara had been home? Or was her home now not where she thought it was at all? The conversation, the sweet compliments, and little caresses went on for a very long time. I think Maria has already fully accepted me, stretched out Barbara, blushing. Where to? Wondered Nicholas. To the family. To your family? The girl whispered and closed her eyes in embarrassment. Oh, you're so good, the man said, hugged her tightly and kissed her. Of course she did. She's had such a hard time dealing with the loss. Please never, ever remind her about her mother. It's a sore subject with us. Forbidden. During the next walk, he bought her a beautiful and expensive scarf. She had never worn anything like it, of course, but she put it on immediately to please the man. Nicholas gave her a charming smile. Barbara, he said, I have a proposition for you. It may sound strange, but listen to the end of it. The young woman brightened. She knew that Europeans were quick to make decisions, but was she really that quick? No, she would not take his last name. She would keep her own, but their future children. I'm all ears, whispered the young woman. Barbara, just listen to the end, okay? Nicholas continued. Maria and I are in trouble, and we're going to do something that's going to get us out of this cycle of bad luck. You have to, As the man recounted his plan, his new poster felt more and more like the heroine of a spy movie, a real thriller. The request for help caused Barbara some apprehension, and she even thought of refusing at first. However, if he would really take her with him to Europe, it could be a risk. An interrogator sounds proud, much better than a district inspector or an internal duty officer. Despite the proud title, Alston hated his current job. All day long, he spent his days circling New York City, conducting pointless interviews with people, and making equally useless rulings. He was in his 30s, captain stars falling on his shoulders, but there was no promotion. It was his own fault. He himself had chosen the dusty job of interrogation, which was dominated by meaningless and useless labor. A man died in the street. His heart stopped. He had to check if a crime had been committed. Even if he was already 90 years old, even if he was a regular at the cardiologist, a man chokes at home in front of witnesses, and the expert confirms it. Do me a favor, interview everyone involved, including neighbors. Even if the medical examiner swears there are 2 cases a week in his neighborhood. A woman with a broken nose went to the hospital, quickly run to her home, question her about whether she suffers from domestic violence. Checks, rulings, orders, and it would be fine if the duties of the inquirer would end there. But no. At least once a week, he had to be on duty at some event or concert. to keep order while the rest of us rested. He wistfully remembered the coronavirus when there was no crime or public events. At least once a week, standing convoy in court. An interrogator had no life, just a job. The only thing that could cheer Austin up at all was an interesting case. He'd had a few of those in his career, but not very often. Usually he felt that some trivial assignment was in danger of turning into something worthwhile. But even then, alas, there were limits. As soon as you come up with an interesting crime, the material will be immediately taken away from you, either by the investigation or by the prosecutor's office. They need it more. Austin, the boss, walked into the office without knocking. "Drop everything, there's an urgent errand to run." Austin adjusted his glasses, a gesture he used deliberately to keep from saying too much. If he did, his bonus would be forfeited, and his meager salary would become a pittance. There was no work in the inquest except urgent work. The ruling he was typing now should have been issued 3 days ago. And the answer still had to be coordinated with the head of the line department. "That's right," Austin replied. "I'll just print out the ruling, or the prosecutor's office will send us another happy letter." "What have you got there?" the supervisor asked, peering unceremoniously into the monitor. "Oh yes, the accident. Your accident can wait, Austin. Look where the assignment came from. Right there." The colonel proudly pointed to the envelope and the document, the 3-letter abbreviation, which the police preferred not to say aloud, inspired respect. But if this assignment was sent down to their level, it means that there can't be anything alive there. It was just another response and a useless check. "All right," Austin nodded. "I'll send the resolution later. But, Comrade Colonel, if anything happens, I'll blame you. If there are any problems with the ruling, no more bickering," said the chief. "You see what kind of cases I'm assigning you. Not just anything, but insurance fraud. Do you have any idea what that is?" Austin adjusted his glasses again. For some reason, the colonel considered everyone below him in rank and position to be feeble-minded. The trouble was that Austin really liked his profession, except that he wanted to investigate more than accidental deaths and age-related deaths, where everything was clear. "Insurance?" the interrogator interjected. "There's even a separate article in our code for this." "Well done. I never doubted you," said the colonel. "Pay attention. Secret. That's how much I trust you. Don't show anyone either the assignment itself or what you dig up. Sign here in the journal. Your deadline is 3 days." When the chief left the office, Austin decided to finish writing the resolution. He printed it out and took it to the clerk's office. Here in the department, any documents had to be transmitted only through trained people. Then he returned to the order. I read the dry text. In principle, the task could be accomplished not only in a day, but in 5 minutes, without leaving the office. But how do they write? Dry, bureaucratic language. Austin read aloud the fragment that was the worst perceived. As a result of the investigation of illegal activities of insurance companies, the senior investigator of the investigation department found. So, investigation. The interests of the widow of Nicholas Mertz are represented by a lawyer with an expired license. The beneficiary must be thoroughly interviewed, and it must be ascertained that his application was valid. In fact, all he has to do is make a report of the interrogation of one single person. And since the investigator assigned it to the district inquiry, there's really nothing to catch. The woman must have been searched for, but either not found or she refused to go somewhere and explain anything. But what language, motherfucker? Who is a beneficiary? The inquirer thought. Someone who gains a benefit. Then why not write widow? Austin knew the answer to that question very well. Whoever had drafted the document wanted to appear very clever, so that the executor would have to type a new word into Google to find out its meaning. The whole query was full of just such turns that could be simplified. This is the trademark style of those who want to appear smarter than they really are. What happened to her husband? The Inquirer said aloud. He found a ruling in the database. There was a whole investigative team working on it. It turns out that the arrogant Nicholas Mertz, ignoring the warning of the storm, went with his daughter to some tourist site in Chicago. Both were washed out to sea. What a drama! The coroner imagined he was the one assigned to investigate such a case. In a separate file, Austin typed the surnames, first names, and patronymics of all the people involved and entered them into a table. It appeared that Selena had been left all alone after the tragic accident. She used to be registered in their neighborhood, but now, according to the real estate database, the woman had gotten rid of the apartment. She must have changed her cell phone, and she certainly wouldn't want to talk to some interrogator and spill her guts about how she'd hired a lawyer with an expired license. Nicholas Mertz was a strange man too. Shortly before his marriage, he had changed his last name for something. He used to be Kearns. Paradoxically, neither the first nor the second name in the databases had nothing at all. No cell phone, no driver's license, no employment records, no medical records. It was as if he didn't even exist. Very interesting, Austin said aloud and continued his search. So, this Mertz was born in Berlin, but under the third name Ivanov. This was evident from the information about his parents. They must have served in the Soviet army and been sent to Germany. The lucky ones. Who would now remember that Soviet soldiers had left the center of Europe a little over 30 years ago? This same Nicholas must have somehow managed to stay in Germany. Maybe his mother was an ethnic German. There were no answers, but the story fascinated him. Anyway, he found his death in the United States. Austin was already preparing to write a report that it was impossible to establish Selena Litkina's whereabouts. She had been evicted from her apartment. Her neighbors did not know her new phone number. She had no relatives in the USA. But as soon as he dialed the phone, there were long beeps in the receiver. And when a woman's voice answered, Austin was even a little confused. The train was already approaching the Washington station, when suddenly, where had her wallet disappeared to? She was sure to take it out and put the ticket in there. Robbed, Selena shouted, wiping away her tears. They took the last of the money. She was consoled by the conductor and a fellow traveler, giving her advice. In the purse that the psychic had stolen, there were credit cards already useless, discount cards, and $300 was the rest of her finances. What's she gonna do now? Good thing she'd stashed one bill. Nothing is nothing, the conductor said, putting her hand on the girl's shoulder. We'll get off at once and write a statement. We'll find this bastard. We'll find him, that's for sure. I've already buried my family, the girl wailed. And now this. There is no justice on earth. After getting off the train, the woman actually walked towards the police room. But something made her freeze. Standing on the platform of the station, Selena realized with horror that madness was coming to her. How else to explain that in the window of the train, which was about to move, she saw Maria. The girl stood with her face pressed against the glass, looking at something on the platform. If it was a ghost, it was a very strange one. Because Maria was much older than the girl she remembered. Selena sobbed, covering her eyes with her hand. Now she would see her daughter everywhere. She would go completely insane, and she would never be able to go back to normal. She should never have gone to that fortune teller. Madness is contagious. Once you touch it, you'll come back again and again. The old woman must have behaved in such a way that she would come back again and again to spend the night in the gazebo, lying on the mat. The woman looked up. The vision had only worsened. Now Michael was standing beside Maria, also looking at the platform. This ghost had changed a little too, a different hair color. When they lived together, her husband asked her to call him Peter in the European manner, which amused Selena. They loved each other so much. She wanted to push the fog away from her, but it wouldn't go away. Tears filled her eyes. The horn sounded and the train started, picking up speed. Maria and Michael's ghosts were leaving for New York on the Sapsan. Selena changed her mind about going to the police station, and since she had almost no money left, she had to buy the cheapest ticket on a regular train. The one that takes forever to move and stops wherever it goes. That solved another problem though. She'd arrive early in the morning and could walk around all day before returning to her parents' house. Call. Interrogator Austin, line division, said a man's voice. Am I speaking to Selena Litkin? Yes, the woman replied. My purse was stolen, but I didn't report it. The conductor must have told you. You stole a wallet? The interviewer was surprised. Then go to the nearest police station immediately. I can take care of it myself. Selena cut her off. What are you calling about? You see, said the policeman, I have an important errand to run, and I need to question you. Are you ever in New York? Yes, Selena answered, trying to speak calmly. I actually live there. The thing is that in the database the apartment is registered to another person, the interrogator said. That's why I thought you had moved. It's not the only apartment, Selena said. So what did you want? She liked the policeman's voice, so deep and raspy. It could only belong to a very brave man. Could you visit me today? He asked. I'll be there until 8 o'clock this evening, but I can stay longer than that. Let's do it tomorrow, Selena suggested. First thing in the morning. Dictate an address. For some reason, her mood improved. The woman wanted to meet this interrogator with a beautiful voice, to go somewhere with him. Probably, if such a man were around, she would never have had her phone stolen in her life. Washington was still herself, a gloomy, bustling, and unfriendly city. There was no room for love, tenderness, or romance, if it weren't for death. Their relationship had long since reached an impasse, a dead end from which there was no escape, no return. She knew it, but there was nothing she could do about it. Selena kept putting off a serious conversation, and then it was too late. Michael was gone, though her heart refused to accept it and kept insisting that he was alive. Nicholas was secretly proud of himself. His ability to improvise always allowed him to solve the most difficult problems. And now, going to New York from the Czech Republic, he only in general terms imagined how to take the money. His own money, by the way, earned in a relatively honest way. But as he got closer to his goal, the plan became clearer and clearer. Man has no path, there is only a goal, he told himself. Alas, there was no one to share his criminal achievements with. All hope on the charming Maria, who was growing up next to him. Yes, he would definitely be able to teach her his craft. For that, she would have to learn and understand a lot. He'd like her to be involved in operations where there's little risk. Otherwise, she'd get addicted to adrenaline like he did, and then she wouldn't be able to do without it. Yesterday he was Peter, and before that Archie, and before that Victor. But the last time, faking his own death was harder. Yes, he wanted to leave Selena. He was sick and tired of her. But what about Maria? It wasn't the girl's fault. He wanted to take his daughter with him. The plan was complex, daring, and risky, and so it worked. For the whole world, they were dead. Of course, he should have done it earlier, when Maria was 2. He was getting too many questions about her mom. The girl at first refused to believe that Celine had betrayed them, but in time, he convinced the child. Besides, the girl liked traveling, flying on the plane, and she didn't have to strain herself to get into character. Nicholas noticed that with a child, documents are not checked as carefully as if he was traveling alone. Now the final push and the big score was in their pocket. Sometimes it happens that fate itself puts signs in your path. You just have to look at them and take them for yourself. And yesterday, as soon as he saw a pretty woman, tactfully called a girl, at the reception desk, he realized that it was fate. She looked too much like her. Did he love Selena? Initially, He needed her for another scam that would only be conquered by a family man. Then he made the mistake of getting too deep into the role. But everything went even better than desired. Not only pulled off the case, but also became a happy father. So fate sent him Barbara like it did Selena. A beautiful, intelligent, gentle girl. Also shy and modest. The kind that fell in love with him especially quickly. We'll have to use it, Nicholas thought. And then, well then what? Throw it away, trample it, erase it from my memory. Austin had a great memory for faces. If he saw a person once, he could easily find him in a crowd. The main thing was to remember when and for what purpose the person was needed. The inquirer liked to go to work on foot, all the more so because the department was not far from the room that had become his temporary shelter 5 years ago and then became permanent. Walking not only saved some of his modest salary, one could enjoy the sights of New York. This beautiful and gloomy city was one of his greatest affections. Today's story was still on his mind. What a villainous fate, so ruthlessly dealt with a handsome man and a girl. Walking home past the seafront, in front of the popular hotel with the poetic name North Wind, Austin saw an idyllic picture. At a table sat, as it seemed to him, a couple in love. Except, where had he seen the man's face? The interrogator stopped to get a better look at the family. He had to cross the road. I have so much to do. Austin thought, I have to run this stupid errand, and then I have to do the inspections over and over again. But he crossed the road anyway. Coffee cost a fortune in a place like this, but cigarettes were the same price as in the store. The pack of his favorite brand was running out, so he decided to do something useful. Both to buy cigarettes and to satisfy his curiosity. But when Austin approached, he saw something amazing and couldn't believe his eyes. And he was glad he wasn't wearing a police uniform. I'll get her out, the interrogator thought, pulling out his cell phone. Luckily, it was the cell phone he'd used to call Selena. The call went off. Trying not to give away his excitement, Austin stared at the woman beside the man he had identified without error, Nicholas Mertz. Strange man, Celine thought. They seemed to have agreed that she would visit the department early in the morning, but a few hours later, Austin dialed her again around 10 o'clock at night while she was shaking in a train car and asking some stupid questions. Now his voice wasn't so appealing anymore. The policeman, on the other hand, was waiting for his guest the way something very good waits. Interrogators are always at the bottom of the law enforcement hierarchy. Austin had heard condescending remarks directed at him so often over the years that he should have gotten used to them, but not this time. Fate gave him a unique chance to prove that he was worth something too, or maybe a step higher. Suddenly, the door opened without knocking. I'm probably at a bad time. At the threshold of the office stood a woman who was still quite young and pretty. According to the instructions, everyone who comes to the office must be noted by the inspector on duty. Clarify the purpose of the visit and call the calling party. Apparently, Celine had managed to get in unnoticed. Come in, he said to his guest. Have a seat. What do I owe you? She asked. Not only did you called twice. I'm very intrigued by you. Instead of answering, Austin pulled out his phone, on which he took several pictures of Nicholas, or whatever his name is, with his family. Zoomed in on the face of the woman with the scarf. Looked like Selena, but definitely not her. Or was this all a con man's cunning plan? Austin didn't trust anyone. Tell me please, the interrogator began. Where is your husband now? The guest's face turned crimson. She seemed angry, but she held back. Then hope flashed in her eyes. Then distrust. The silence lengthened, but Austin decided not to break it. How else would he get this lady to come clean? I don't know. Selena exhaled. I buried him over a year ago. But the coffin was empty. They say his car was swept out to sea by a wave. Patience ran out, and the guest began to sob. She wailed so much that Alex looked in from the next room to make sure no one needed help. Austin made a gesture with his hand. Got away. The guest calmed down. So you haven't seen your spouse since the day he went missing? The police officer continued his inquiry. At that moment, Selena's anger reappeared on her face. She jumped up from her chair, ran right up to Austin, and blasted him in the face. I knew, of course, that not the most intellectually gifted people go into the service. But this, I couldn't have imagined it. My husband is missing, along with my little girl. Your colleagues investigated the case. Wasn't it hard to ask for the files? Austin adjusted his glasses. It was hard for him to keep a nonchalant expression on his face, but it was worth it. He was trying to figure out if it was possible to play that kind of emotion. Probably not. I requested it, the inquirer replied. The case is still open. Then why all these silly questions? The woman shouted. To make me suffer. At this point, the interrogator realized that the exegesis could be stopped. If she was acting, she was very talented. But most likely, Selena really didn't know anything about her husband's fate. Besides, the policeman really wanted to brag about his talents and luck. After all, how else to explain his fantastic luck? I believe your spouse survived, the interrogator said in a nonchalant tone. Really? The woman asked hopefully and wiped away her tears. But why? Why do you think so? Because I found it, Austin smiled and held out his phone to her. Here, look. Selena looked at the screen and the world around her swam. It was a good thing she was sitting up, or she would have collapsed to the ground. She easily recognized Nicholas, her pet, though his appearance had changed a bit. Though his hair was new and his nose looked a little longer, it was him. The oval of his face, his eyes, his mouth, the same one who had complimented her relentlessly and swore eternal love. It can't be, whispered Celine. It can't be. And you don't recognize this woman? The interrogator asked. He zoomed in on the screen in front of the stranger's face. She didn't even catch Selena's eye right away. There was a woman looking at her from the screen who reminded her of someone. Who? White hair, red-rimmed glasses. Oh, that's... Oh my God! Selena wondered, wiping her hair. It's me, isn't it? I mean, she looks like me. It can't be. This lady must have kidnapped them. She's pretending to be me, playing me for a fool. We need to apprehend her now. You need to apprehend her now. I'll prove that I'm the real Selena. The interrogator coughed and adjusted his glasses. On the one hand, he wanted to laugh. On the other, he had to keep his temper in check. He had almost solved the crime that would finally get his career off the ground. It was a string of atrocities. I have some bad news for you, Selena, Austin exhaled. Your ex-husband is not who he says he is. He's a talented con man. No, replied the visitor. It's a mistake. It's an accident. Come on, arrest this woman. Arrest her immediately. You can see she's a divorcee. Understand, I am a simple interrogator, the policeman said. Of course, I have no experience in investigating such cases, but I doubt your word very much. All indications are that Peter Mertz is the real liar here. By the way, he has a different name now. The guest began to sob again. The interrogator was surprised at her reserve of emotions. He himself could not have reacted so violently to such news. Of course, he should have drawn up a protocol of interrogation, a report, recorded the photo on disk, and sent it all to the investigation as soon as possible. Better yet, detain Peter. I don't understand anything anymore, the woman said. And by the way, I have deceived you. I have absolutely nowhere to stay in St. Petersburg. I have no apartment anymore. Here's what we'll do, Celine, Austin said after a brief thought. His plan wasn't flawless, of course, but it seemed reasonable. For the first time since Michael's disappearance, she felt interested in and attracted to a man. His proposal made Selena blush, and she thought that she could hardly hold herself back. Selena heard a drunken voice from down the long hallway. "He's brought a woman, finally." "Never mind," Austin said, showing her the direction. "That's right, the locals. That's right. Pay no attention, beautiful stranger," shouted the drunken man. "Pashka, well done, way to go." The interrogator blushed thickly. He rented a room in a relic of a bygone era. Selena looked with interest at one of the last of the St. Petersburg communal houses. High ceilings, carved windows, moldings and peeling pottery, and skeins of wires running along the walls, and the musty smell of a room that needs to be renovated, but is easier to tear down. "I'm still lucky," Austin smiled as they walked in. "There's no mold in my room. Make yourself comfortable." Selena looked around. Finding a spare seat in this room was no easy task. There was a couch along the longest wall. Opposite it was an old closet. The rest of the room was occupied by a desk with a computer and some sort of kitchenette. Both the floor and the glass had not been cleaned for a long time. Austin blushed even more as he intercepted his guest's gaze, who was scrutinizing the dirt and grease. "It's just temporary," he said. "Here, I'm taking it off until they give me a work permit." "How long has it been out?" Selena asked out of politeness. "It's been 6 years," shrugged the interrogator. "How do we do it?" "First it's the cops, then family." "What, they don't give it at all?" asked the guest. "No," Austin answered and blushed again. "Is it still about the apartments?" She smiled. It was a weak joke, but it was something. Selena looked at the policeman because there was nothing else to look at. A good-looking man, neat and intelligent. It must be hard for him to work in the police force. Can't even get a decent apartment. I wish he had a wife. "I'm sorry for the details, but I'm after the road," Selena said. "I need to wash up." "Come on, I'll walk you out," the policeman offered. "We've got an old house here, and there's no chance of anything happening." In the communal room, there was a large kitchen block, and just behind it were showers and toilets. It was possible to wash behind a curtain with no doors or latches. She was a little embarrassed, but she still had no choice. The last time she had washed herself properly was 3 days ago at a roadside inn. "I could get a room," Selena said timidly, "if I'm embarrassing you." "No, no, no, not at all," replied the policeman. "Don't worry, I'll turn around. Besides, you can't see anything through the curtain anyway." In fact, Selena couldn't get a room. The money had been stolen, and the remaining sum wouldn't even be enough for a bed in a hostel. She couldn't even think of what to do next. She couldn't pay back the loan after she mortgaged the property. Go back to her parents. No, we need to get to the bottom of this whole story first. Is her daughter really alive? Selena turned on the water. The faucet made a sound like devils howling from the underworld. She remembered the mysterious visit to the fortune teller, after which she had decided to return to New York. Her grandmother Julianne had been right. Was it luck, coincidence, or a secret gift? The water from the faucet was barely warm, but Selena still felt pleasure. She was washing away not only the dirt, but also the past. Soon she would get her daughter back, find answers to all her questions, and live happily ever after. "I wonder," Selena thought, "is that man looking at me through the curtain? Staring?" There was no mirror here, but she realized that she looked good. Constant movement and lack of appetite had given her back her slim figure. She had naturally nice hips and neat breasts. And a pretty face too. Perhaps this flushed policeman could solve one more of her problems, not just give her a place to sleep. "Austin," Selena said, peeking out from behind the curtain, "pass me a towel." The interrogator glanced at her, adjusted his glasses, and blushed again. She herself made her breasts appear from behind the curtain, as if by accident. Let him look around and appreciate his good fortune. Selena wiped herself all over, applied scented oil to her body, and put on fresh linen. She had to put her jeans and blouse back on, since the way to her room was across the hall. What a blessing! She said when they got back to the room. "Austin, what are you doing for dinner?" "Well," the interrogator stretched out, "I usually eat a bun with kefir. And you, if you want, you can boil your own pasta. Or buckwheat. I've got a lot of stuff to choose from. Don't be shy." Selena opened the bachelor's refrigerator. Not much. Chicken eggs, melted cheese, and in the freezer there was a chicken fillet. Pasha had a multi-cooker in his room, surprisingly clean. He probably didn't use it very often. Selena finally chopped the frozen fillet, fried it, then added water and boiled the pasta right in it. When the water evaporated, she cracked a chicken egg into it and tossed in some cheese slices. It was good. "It's delicious," said Austin, eating the pasta with delight. "It's delicious." You see, Austin, what one woman can do. Cook a meal and warm a bed. "No, I'll go to a friend's place," the interrogator said embarrassedly. "I have a friend living in the next room. He has a bunk bed. And you sleep. Don't be shy." "Don't be silly," Selena said. "I can see that this couch folds out. I can cook more than just pasta, you know." She hugged his arm and began rubbing his muscles. The cop appeared to be a trained pleasant to hold, but Austin gently reached his hand out. Then she put her arm around his shoulders and tried to fondle him. "No," he said. "No, you don't. I can't do that." "Am I ugly?" Selena said indignantly. "You don't like me." "You do," Austin replied. "It's just, I'm at work. Why don't you guys go to bed? I'll be right back." Embarrassed, he stalked out of his room. Yes, this was not how he had envisioned an evening in the company of this woman. But no, one must not give in to temptation, work first. In the evening, he had sent an urgent request to the insurance company and would soon receive a reply. He also requested the details of all the guests at the hotel with the poetic name. There was only one man and a girl. That's how Austin got the con man's new name. This crook would hardly wait long. Every new day was a risk for him. Walking towards the showers, Austin slammed himself on his pocket. He had forgotten his phone in the room. He thought it was no big deal, but he was wrong. Insurers are fat cats, Nicholas liked to tell his daughter Maria. If you only knew how much money they make from our fears. Fear of what? The girl asked. She was bright, of course, but not as bright as her father would have liked to think. On the fear of death, explained Nicholas. Loss, bankruptcy, but that's okay, baby. I'll pay them back for all the wrongs done to me. You'll see, they'll make a movie about me. Your daddy's a real hero. Daddy, why did you change your name? The girl asked. I told you it was a big secret, hissed the man, clearly losing patience. Please don't bring it up. Daddy's name is Nicholas, okay? His plan is on the home stretch. Now, all that's left to do is cash out. Some might say this scheme is crazy. It started with a standardized plan. Insure himself and his daughter for a tidy sum. All inclusive. Accident or natural disaster. Overseas or domestic maximum coverage. Then fake your own death. And your daughter's death, of course. The next thing was interesting. His wife knew nothing about his devious plan or his supposed death. What's more, she didn't even know about the insurance. All correspondence with the company after the accident was handled by Mickey's lawyer. And if the company had decided to contact the widow, everything would have fallen apart. But the con man knew that wouldn't happen. Even an experienced investigator wouldn't recognize this man as Nicholas, or Peter, for that matter. Instead of a thick head of hair, an unsightly bald spot. A ridiculous belly that's about to rip a button out of his shirt. Then there's the freckles, the blue eyes, the jutting jaw. Could you please come to the office? His employee politely asked him over the phone. Oh, Mickey replied, my client has no money at all. And my time, costs a lot of money. But we need a personal presence. The employee did not back down. I apologize, but I sent all the documents, the lawyer said. In addition, according to Article 28, Paragraph 1. And Nicholas began to recite from memory the legal provisions according to which communication with the insurer can be conducted remotely. That the client has a right to privacy, which is why he hired a lawyer. That you should respect other people's feelings. The employee on the other end of the line sighed, but kept her line. "You see," said the girl, "it is required by the security service. Look carefully, it's written in the contract." Mickey only smiled slyly. He had foreseen this scenario a long time ago. He'd been prepared for it for a long time. "Well," the lawyer sighed, "let's do it this way. Next week, when I have a window between trials, I'll let you know. In advance, of course. But that kind of mistrust, of course, makes it impossible for me to speak favorably of your company from now on." Mickey's a highly sought-after lawyer, so it was up to the head of the benefits department to accommodate him. A very busy man, he was only able to visit the office on Wednesday, the third day after he and his daughter arrived in New York. You should see the way Mickey moves. He's got the walk of a winner, a master of life. The kind of man who can afford to look the way he wants to look. "I don't have much time," the lawyer said together with a greeting as he entered the office. "Have you done the paperwork yet?" "Yes, of course," the man replied. "You realize how much money this is, even for our company." "Ho, ho, ho," laughed Mickey. "Tell me something about the big money. I know your whole company like the back of my hand. How you like to challenge even the tiniest payout in court." "Yes, but try to get a word in edgewise with the insurer." "I'm still surprised you didn't make my client swear on the Bible," the lawyer pressed him. The man had suffered such grief. "Luckily, I did a legal review of the contract myself. There were no grounds for refusal." "It's about a client," the department head said, as soon as his guest was silent for a second. "She has to sign the documents herself. It's a security requirement. If you don't agree, go to court." There was silence. Mickey weighed the words of his interlocutor on his fingertips. "Well," said the lawyer to the head of the benefits department, "my client is depressed with grief. I don't know if she can come in person. Give me 1 minute, I'll call her." Without waiting for an answer, the lawyer went out into the corridor. From behind the door, the insurer could hear the lawyer explaining something emotionally to his interlocutor. His voice was beautiful and well-practiced, so you wouldn't want to argue. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. "I talked. It's just a formality," the insurance company representative said. "All she has to do is sign and she'll get her money. Right away." "Oh, there you go," stretched out Mickey. "I talked the client into it. Yes, it's quite possible. But I'm begging you, please be considerate. A man has lost the most precious thing in his life, his husband, and his daughter, of course. And then there's this." "Yes, yes," said the delighted insurer. "Selena insists that the 100 million must be given in cash. Contact the bank and have them encash the amount in the largest denominations." But the warden was surprised. "It's not a storage facility, actually." "I insist," the lawyer said firmly. "She wants to carry kilos of money, for God's sake. It's not your concern. And I will take the denial of this small request of an inconsolable widow as a personal insult. Let me know when you're ready. I've got to go." Mickey didn't even shake his hand, but walked toward the door with a victorious gait. Soon he would receive a tidy sum and head back to his hideout in the Czech Republic. Nicholas, alias Peter, alias Mickey, was sure that his plan was doomed to success. If only the con man could know how wrong he was. Using his powers of authority and a semi-secret assignment, Austin got the whole story. So, this Nicholas Peter wants to pull off a noble scam. He faked his own death, and to avert suspicion from himself and the death of his daughter. He took out an insurance policy so his wife wouldn't even know about it. He corresponded on behalf of the lawyer and made it look as if the inconsolable widow herself did not want to see anyone. "What a hard worker," the interrogator said with delight. "Yes, he deserves respect." I'm sure the scam wasn't the only one. Austin had received information about the conman's current data even earlier. As is customary for foreigners, they were sent to the local police department, and they're carefully placed in the database where they could be accessed by any employee if necessary. Austin was faced with a difficult choice. On the one hand, he had to inform his boss that a trivial 3-letter agency assignment had solved a serious crime. On the other hand, he could take all the credit for the tracker to someone else. No, that's not what he'll do. Like a hunter, he would rush fearlessly at his prey and throw it at the colonel's feet. You should be lucky, the interrogator said to the invisible interlocutor. After that sleepover, she never asked him for help again. Luck likes preparation, and I've been preparing for it for 10 years, no less. So he now knew the exact day and hour when the crook's accomplice would come for the money. Friday, 4:00 p.m., give or take. The interrogator decided to rent a car share for the day to go out. He didn't have his own car, of course. Park across the street at 2:00. And wait. To ambush him, Austin took a day off work. His boss looked at him with round eyes, but the interrogator was adamant. I apologize, Austin said, adjusting his glasses. But I've got a month's worth of time off. I'm only asking for 1 day. And what is it that you want to do so badly? For the first time in the years of their acquaintance, a slight smile ran across his face. Is it really a woman? You guessed it, said the interrogator. She came here, a woman from out of town. She asks me to take her to the historical center, to take her to the bridge. Well, you get the picture. All right, said the boss, but just 1 day, and to come to work as usual at 7:40. Is that clear? That's right, Austin replied. When he got to his room in the communal apartment, he couldn't calm down for a long time. He replayed the smallest details of his operation in his head, how he would take down the crook. From the back, of course, how he'd put the bracelets on him, load him into a car share car. Of course, police regulations required at least 2 officers to both apprehend and escort criminals. But sometimes instructions could be ignored. Austin also longed for Selena. Why didn't I give her what she wanted yesterday? He thought, I'd basically wanted the same thing. However, as soon as he apprehends the crook and solves the most complicated crime alone, he is sure to get a promotion, and with it a raise in salary, a nice apartment and women. It is only necessary to be a little patient. With these thoughts, the policeman fell asleep and woke up only by the alarm clock. The interrogator could not wait. He immediately rented a car, not some budget Volkswagen Polo, but a luxury red Ford Mustang. It didn't have car share stickers on it, so it would attract a little less attention. Plus, this car had no rear doors, so the twisted criminal wouldn't be able to get away with it. Although the interrogator had originally planned to set up an ambush at 2:00 in the afternoon, he decided not to delay. Already at 10:00 in the morning, his Ford was parked across the street from the office of the insurance company. He decided not to eat at all, but to drink water in small sips, so that his physiological needs would not become an obstacle to his triumph. Austin sat in the car and waited. It turns out that ambushes are very tiring. There were dozens and hundreds of people walking past him. It wasn't the busiest place, but New York was never empty. He watched them, trying to memorize details. The seat in the car was very comfortable, and even after 2 hours from the beginning of the ambush, neither his back nor his legs hurt. From time to time, the policeman started the engine and turned on the massage mode. Yeah, he thought, if I were to sit in an ambush, it would be in a vehicle like this. It's a dream. Well, so he'll be able to afford a nice car too. Maybe he'll even have a driver in his new position. Not a personal driver, of course, but that's okay. So he could dial him and say, Jack, 5 minutes. He was snapped out of his pleasant thoughts by a strange picture. No way. Austin, an interrogator with 8 years' experience, couldn't believe his eyes. Into the office of the insurance company walked Selena. She was looking around restlessly, and she also wore glasses. But having seen the face once, he would never forget this woman. It's only 1 o'clock in the afternoon. What was she doing in the office? Austin got out of the car, ran across the road, and lurked at the side. He pretended to watch his smartphone, though he hadn't even unlocked the screen. It had been quite a while, 30 or 40 minutes, when a woman came out of the office. She was holding 2 large bags in her hands, and judging by the change in her gait, it was hard for her to walk. The interrogator followed her. There can be no doubt she took the money herself. How did he miss the widow? The triumph of her apprehension could hardly compare with the capture of the ringleader. The husband must have risen from the dead and persuaded his wife to help him. Well, we must act. The interrogator quickened his pace. Selena, Austin said as he approached his ward. Svetochka, where are you going? The woman set down her bags and turned around. There was no worry, fear, or doubt on her face. Just a huge smile from ear to ear. Suddenly, Selena raised her hand so sharply that Austin didn't even have time to blink an eye, and the light went out for the inquirer. Selena now felt deceived twice. First, it turned out that her hubby wasn't dead, and then the interrogator, who looked like an ordinary nerd, was squeamish about her gorgeous body. She's still full of life. So Selena decided she had to do something on her own. Finding Peter was easy. All the information she needed was in the inquirer's cell phone. When he denied her sex and retreated, he'd forgotten it. Plus, his screen lock is a simple zipper. That's the first thing that popped into her head. In a separate file that was in the open apps, she found a notepad where her and her husband's details were written. Even the name of the hotel and the room. Getting past the desk clerk proved to be an easy task. She just walked forward, toward the stairs, and no one called out to her. It must not be customary to ask guests questions. When she got to the 3rd floor, she was lucky again. Walking down the hallway was her husband. She ran up to him and slapped him in the face. Peter stood there like a thunderstruck man. It wasn't her who saw the dead man, it was him. He rubbed his cheek and remained silent. He hadn't changed a bit. He was still handsome. How could she not have noticed that wormhole in him? How could she have come up with such a plan? And all for what? For money? Well, Selena said, looking at her husband, that's how you are with me. I've already buried you, and you're safe and sound. The man was confused. His eyes ran left and right down the corridor. Let's move away, he said, and pulled her to the side. But the woman pulled away and pushed him away. No. Selena was indignant. I have to see her. To see my daughter. The one you took from me. Svetochka, he said in a languid voice. It's a very long, scary and fantastic story. I don't even know how to convince you to believe me. I'm guilty, yes guilty, but not in the way you might think. I'm in no hurry, the woman replied. Come on, tell me your fantastic story, before I call the police to put you in jail. How did you find me? He asked. Peter, aka Nicholas, aka Mickey, couldn't understand what he'd done wrong. He knew that his ex-girlfriend had left Peter. He was convinced that they would never cross paths in this huge city. And Selena kept silent. She didn't want to tell him about the interrogator. The insurance company called me, she blurted out. Peter's face twisted in a grimace of rage and fear. He turned pale and his lips turned blue. What did you tell them? He asked in a whisper. Nothing, the woman shrugged. Said I'd be sure to get the money. I don't need it, you know. Thank God, he exhaled. You sure you didn't say anything? No, Selena replied, and decided to change the unpleasant subject. So that's all you care about. What about my feelings? Peter smiled. His face brightened, his lips red again, and his eyes. It seemed to her that they were filled with love again. He took her elbow in a gentle gesture. She couldn't find the strength to push him away. She wanted to burst into tears, but the woman pulled herself together. Let's go outside, he asked. Let's go for a walk, have some coffee. No, Selena cut Selena off. I have to go inside right now, to look at her. Maria is asleep, Peter said. Please listen to me. Did you know that I was thinking about you? For example, you sold the apartment. So you followed me. The woman was surprised. Not sold, but mortgaged. It doesn't matter, my husband said. I mean, I was going to come out to you myself. In just a few days. When they went outside, they were immediately blown away by the cold St. Petersburg wind. It's no different here. They crossed the road and sat down in one of the coffee shops. I don't understand one thing, Selena said. What kind of husband are you to me, ex-husband or not? I'm officially a widow, by your grace. Don't scold me, Peter asked. You'll find out now. A little sooner than I expected, and he did tell her a story. As fantastic as Julienne's grandmother's story, but as Selena listened to her husband, she believed him more and more, and by the end of the story she doubted everything but Peter's honesty. Gradually, her eyes returned to normal. Some kind-hearted people brought him to the toilet of the cafe, where the interrogator washed his face for a long time. The pain was unbearable, but the cause was not a chemical burn. No, with Selena, his career rushed past him, and she'd blasted him in the face like a wild animal. But the problems didn't end there. Pulling out his cell phone, Austin saw a dozen missed calls. He couldn't hear the calls because he had set his smartphone to silent mode. They were dialed by the same person who signed his name simply as Chief. Had someone reported to the police that an unknown woman had sprayed tear gas in a police officer's face? Hello, said the interrogator, trying to put a relaxed tone to his voice. What's up, slacker? Roared the chief. Have you had enough of your women? Not yet, replied Austin. What happened? What's wrong? The warden shrieked. He's still asking. To the department. To the department, quickly. The interrogator had no way of knowing where he was. He even had to turn on the navigator to figure it out. Yeah, right next to the insurance office. Someone must have seen it when that woman sprayed gas in his face and helped him to the bathroom. His eyes were still watering, so Austin didn't want to drive the rental car. He called a cab. The interrogator walked into the department, looking like he was going to the scaffold. What do I do? Deny it. He'll never admit he was trying to catch a con man. There's no report, no paperwork. It's all in his head. He'll write a detailed report that he decided to follow a suspicious woman and she sprayed him in the face. Hello, Austin said innocently, walking into the supervisor's office. You wanted to see me? Surprisingly, the colonel was sitting modestly in his chair, and on the chair of the head sat some red-haired man, and not just sitting, but throwing his feet on the table, unheard of impertinence. Showed up, said the warden. Hero lover, you've had enough, haven't you? Look who's here for you. Austin looked at the red-haired man. He didn't look like a very nice man. A crumpled sweater, a shabby jacket, boots with huge soles. But since he not only took the chair of the chief, but also threw his feet on the table, the man is not easy. It was evident from the prickly eyes. Hello, the little man said, removing his feet. Hello, replied the interrogator. With whom do I have that honor? It's Fox, said the warden, and turned off your pontoon cutter. A fox. Austin was surprised. It looked human. That's my call sign, the man explained. Does Fox have a name? The interrogator insisted. Names are not allowed for operatives, said the guest, standing up. Oh, you screwed up, Captain. You screwed up. The colonel took out a handkerchief and began to wipe his face restlessly. Sweat was dripping from his forehead. So not only did they know about his shame, Austin must have violated something that made the three-letter office come to the house in person, and all alone. I don't know what you're talking about, the interrogator shrugged. I got the day off today. I'll do whatever I want. Shut up, shouted the colonel. Are you playing games here? You and I are no longer in the same boat. I've said it all. I've said it all. That this is amateur hour, from start to finish. You're no longer with us, Austin." "Am I fired?" Austin asked. He felt sick to his stomach. "Fired." Fox mocked him and strode toward the door. He grabbed the handle. "Did you think you'd get off that easy? Follow me quickly." I'm not going," the inquirer said. "I'm not going anywhere." "Go on, take care of yourself," the operative replied. "Yes, go." The chief put an end to his ambitions. "Go yourself, or I'll tell our people and they'll bring you out in bracelets. To be honest, I would have thrown you in the monkey house." It was only now that Austin realized the gravity of what was happening. It seems he's not just fired anymore. Would the policeman of yesterday now become a prisoner? Austin felt scared and sweaty. Selena took the interrogator down with ease. Her hand was being pulled by the gigantic sum of $1 million. Yeah, Peter's plan was good. How clever of him to set her up to suffer, grief-stricken, and so that no one would ever think that her emotions might not be real. What a scoundrel, thought Selena. I almost lost my mind. And still what a man. He rented her an apartment 2 blocks from the insurance office, and she had already met Maria. The girl said some strange things to her. She even looked at her with suspicion. Well, that's okay. The baby will get used to it. It's good that they're together again. Now she has money. And put it in the bank? I don't think you can carry that kind of money on board. It went like clockwork. Selena blurted out as she entered the apartment. "Did you take it?" her husband asked seriously. Selena wanted to hug and caress him, but he gently pushed her away and took the bag of money in his hand. He weighed it, figuring out how much cash there was. "How did you get there?" Peter said. "That's a heavy burden." "Yeah," Selena replied. "I'm exhausted. I thought I'd be right back." And there we'd be. "What about the policeman?" my husband asked. "How did you get around him?" "Just like you said," the woman grinned. "Pepper spray in the eyes. When he went for his face, I sprayed some more. And then some more. He's probably still waking up. Look, I'm such a criminal. Why don't we make this quick, honey?" "Yes, it's a serious article," Peter said thoughtfully, ignoring her words. He continued to admire the stacks of $5,000 bills. Assault on a police officer. Yes, with bodily harm. That's, real time. "I've been waiting for you," Selena said. "I'd had a lot of people asking for me, I knew you were alive. I took care of myself, But Peter's attention was consumed with money. He couldn't believe his scam had gone so easily. What remained was not the hardest part, but the time-consuming part, getting it all out of the country. He already had a plan. This time, he'd have to be honest. His search company would buy nearly $100 million worth of luxury goods from the US, smuggle it out to Europe. "Why aren't you talking, my love?" Selena asked. "I'm talking to you." "I'm sorry, I got distracted," Peter smiled. "I wanted to tell you what a great job you did. You did great, just like we discussed." "I've been trying to talk you into it for half an hour," said the woman. "I haven't had sex in over a year, and you're not even listening to me." "Oh, I'm sorry," my husband replied, and something in his face changed. "Take a shower, sweetie. I'll get everything ready. Let's not rush into anything." Selena glared. Of course, he might not be so capricious and take her as is. But a shower wouldn't hurt. She wanted to wash away the horror of the past months. Burying her own husband and daughter, she was on the verge of despair. Peter had rented a nice apartment. The bathroom was state-of-the-art. She opened the shower door and pressed the massage mode, and small streams of water immediately rushed into her from all sides. It felt good. Selena remembered washing herself in the communal room a couple days ago and hitting on that policeman. Oh my God, it was disgusting to think about. Was she about to fall into Peter's arms? She rubbed the shampoo on her body and imagined with pleasure how he would caress her. What a man! He'd arranged everything so well. Meanwhile, Pega counted the stacks of money and made sure every dollar was there. Well, he was lucky to have Selena. She was the most honest and decent woman he'd ever met. He'd liked it at first, but then he'd gotten annoyed. A man can't be that good 24/7. At first, he thought of just leaving. Sooner or later, the police would have her in custody. What do they have on him? Nicholas Crass has impeccable credentials. There will be a real diplomatic scandal if he's detained. What's more, he's dead to everyone but this interrogator. But as far as Peter understood from his wife, this policeman was running the operation alone, without informing anyone. When he realizes he's been duped, he'll just throw the ends in the water. Selena struggled to get out of her thoughts and into the shower room. Not only was she clean now, but she smelled so exciting. Peter couldn't help himself. He knocked politely on the door. Oh, how gallant. Still the same. Come in, she called in a languid voice. Come in, my love, and rub my back. Peter took a step inside. He smiled and hid one hand behind his back. There must be a present in there. He stepped closer and held out a towel to her. Selena tossed it aside and showed her body in all its glory. She stroked her sides and hips erotically and tried to make a seductive movement. See how lucky you are to have a baby girl, she said playfully. Yes, he replied. Very lucky. I don't know how you're holding back, Selena said. That's a lot of willpower. I thought you were going to grab me right away and carry me to our bed. Patience, the man said. Patience, dear. What are you hiding behind your back? The woman asked. Very interesting. There was silence. Her husband looked at her without taking his eyes off her. She had seen that look before. At times like this, Selena usually shook his hand and asked him, "What are you thinking about?" He never answered. Now the pause lingered. "Goodbye, my love," Peter said and removed his hand from behind his back. Celine's eyes widened with surprise and fear. She suddenly felt cold standing naked in front of the traitor. Fox drove like a real hooligan. He was driving an old Mercedes, which seemed to have a very powerful engine under the hood. The operative maneuvered through the rows, accelerated and braked sharply. He also kept looking at Austin and repeating, "You're in trouble, Captain. Oh, you're in trouble. You're a captain." The interrogator decided not to answer. The fear had passed, and now he had both the will and the desire to act. They wouldn't charge him with anything. After all, he hadn't violated anything. Getting fired was probably the worst thing that could happen, unless something terrible happened. "It's with me," Fox said as they entered a building with huge columns. The main office of the three-letter agency that everyone doesn't like to memorialize. The guard nodded and pressed a button, and the turnstile in front of Pavel turned green. "Go," the operative ordered. "Well, walk. Over there." He pointed to a dark corridor that ended in a metal door. Fox swiped his card, and the lock opened. Austin moved on. To both left and right were doors beyond number. As they walked down the corridor, the interrogator saw an interrogation room, just like in American movies. "What interested?" smiled the operative. "Do you know him?" "First time I've ever seen it," lied the interrogator. "Well, talk, talk," Fox sneered. Behind the glass was Nicholas, aka Peter, aka Mickey, aka God knows who else. So the con man had been apprehended after all. The coroner was relieved. There were two men sitting in front of the con man, questioning him. Fox swiped his card, pressed a button, and could hear what was being said behind the glass. "Attempted murder," one of the investigators stretched out. "Okay, he'd be running his scams like he always does. But no, he's getting wet. You're gonna be in jail for a long time, if you don't cooperate with us." "Murder?" Nicholas asked with a slight accent and a smile. "Do you think it's possible to kill with a stun gun?" "Yes, if you hit a wet body in the heart," blurted out the investigator. "You're such a bastard. It's good that this woman has a great health. She'll live." I don't know what this is about, Nicholas yawned. Wake me up when my lawyer gets here. The fox pressed the button again, and the room fell silent. He moved on, and Austin had no choice but to follow. They reached the end of the hallway. There was a video intercom in front of the door. The operative pressed the button, and it was as if his face had changed to a more welcoming one. I brought you, Comrade Colonel. There was a beep, and the door opened. They went inside, walked past the reception area, where a pretty girl was sitting, only in a shirt with epaulettes. In the office sat a man with graying temples, curious eyes, and looked at his guest with interest. Well, said the colonel, the interrogator everyone's talking about. Have a seat, don't be shy. You almost ruined our operation. This is a major project, by the way. Me? The policeman interjected, picking out a chair. Talking to this big man was not like the execution he had so much dreaded. I only wanted to apprehend a crook. Imagine, so did we, said the big boss. It turns out they wanted the same thing. How did we step on each other's tails, wondered Austin. Agents don't sleep, the operative replied haughtily. What, you thought you could outplay us, huh? We've had everything captured and intercepted for a long time. The colonel looked at his subordinate with disdain. He didn't seem to like the fact that he was speaking to the guest in such a tone. Tell you what, Fox, said the warden. Go on out the door. Go do your business, and we'll have a little chat. Me? The cop was surprised. What's that? Get out, shouted the colonel, instantly losing patience. Come on, argue with me, rookie. Leave us two alone, quick. Humiliated, Fox left the office. He looked at the policeman one last time with eyes full of hatred. The colonel rose from his leather chair and approached Austin, looked carefully into his eyes. The interrogator was embarrassed, took off his glasses, and began to wipe the glasses. Brilliant work, he praised with a smile. I mean it now, without irony. To solve such a crime in just 3 days. It was an accident, said the inquirer. Besides, I missed it. I understand Selena almost died because of me. You missed it because you had neither the forces nor the means, the colonel said seriously. Remember, every operation requires cover and support. One is not a warrior in the field. Is that clear to you? Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Austin said. How did you find this Peter Nicholas? Where did he go wrong? Still on women, the colonel grinned. Our swindler began his affair with a certain Barbara, a hotel porter. Initially, he'd offered to play the role of ex-wife to her. And then the real Mrs. Selene got involved. That's your fault, Comrade Captain. Such a valuable witness should be led to the end. Soda, I understand, nodded the colonel. There weren't enough forces and resources. That's why you should have taken the matter upstairs instead of playing the hero. So when Barbara saw her man with her ex, that's when her patience ran out. And we have a special relationship with hotels. You know, things happen in hotels. They owe us 1,000 times over. I couldn't believe it when I saw the picture. Mertz, my ass. So we played this blitz. And to me, is there a complaint against me? The inquirer asked. No, replied the warden. It was I who asked Fox to deliver you. And he probably got scared. Maybe even showed his badge. Don't pay any attention to him. He's a competent officer, but he's not very discerning when it comes to achieving his goals. Sometimes, I chose his call sign, by the way. What about Selena? The inquirer asked. Did that scoundrel really want to kill her? Imagine that, the colonel said seriously. He's very, very clever. A stun gun, you know, is not much of a weapon. Unreliable and cumbersome. But it can be used to kill. Of course, it would still have to be proved. Let the investigation work. Well then, Austin said, getting up from his chair. It was nice to meet you, of course, and to get off scot-free. But it's time for me to get back into my routine. Especially since I'm not getting fired and nothing terrible has happened. What, you want to look for a criminal trail in trivial deaths again? Smiled the colonel. I have a better idea, as they say. I have a vacancy in the department. Of course, we won't take it right away. You have to retrain, take exams. It's nothing personal, Captain, but after 8 years in the line, some people even forget the American alphabet. The interrogator glowed. This was the chance that comes once in 10 years. Soti was right, and the case was indeed a winnable one. Austin adjusted his spectacles, straightened up. But don't think that we have a resort here, the colonel continued. People here don't see their wives for weeks at a time. There's plenty of work. Salary? Well, better than yours, of course. But not a gold mine. You'd better think about it before you take it. If I submit my documents tomorrow, will it be okay? Said the former interrogator. Maybe you could give me the phone number of the head of the personnel department right away, so that I don't have to bother you unnecessarily. The colonel smiled and shook Austin's hand. Well, as they say here, welcome to the force, son. By the way, what do you think of the call sign Cupid? You look a little like him, don't you think?
Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark. Bright streetlights shone through the window. Night moths swirled in their light. Their dance mesmerized her, even soothed her. Sleep did not come to the girl. Various thoughts about work, the future, and the past popped into her head.
Upstairs, the neighbors were noisy as usual. They were laughing loudly, talking, even singing songs. That would have been all right, but today was Wednesday. Emily had to get up early for work tomorrow. At 6 a.m., it was a long way to the bus stop, and the drive itself took almost an hour. Emily wondered how her neighbors lived. Okay, the old people got pensions, but the young? The family on the top floor is having a party right now. Do they really live on children's allowances? And the neighbors have a lot of kids.
Dirty, hungry, in rags, perky. They grow like weeds. They're often sick, even die, because of parental neglect. Like that boy last year, Jason, I think a 1.5-year-old toddler walked out of the house at night in the winter while his parents were out drinking. They didn't even notice the child wasn't home. They only realized it the next day at lunchtime. But it was too late, the baby had frozen. The older children were taken away from the family. But a year later, the parents had a new baby. And now the neighbor was pregnant again. Emily sighed as she looked at the lives of these children. She realized that she herself was lucky. It could have been worse. Emily had grown up in an orphanage. Yes, she lacked the warmth and care of loved ones, but she was fed, clean, and clothed. In the orphanage, she was trained as a pastry chef, and when she turned 18, the state gave her an apartment in an old wooden 2-story barrack house on the outskirts of the city. Dusty, unasphalted streets, overgrown with grass, dumps everywhere, garbage was rarely taken out. Every now and then the water, electricity, and heating were cut off. Cockroaches crawled around the apartments. The neighborhood was dysfunctional. Mostly marginal families lived here, like the neighbors upstairs. Also old people and ordinary but poor people with no means to move. Creaking floors, old rickety frames, the smell of damp and mold. But what frightened Emily most of all were the thin walls. Through them she could hear everything from the neighboring apartments. This was the kind of place Emily had gotten. And what to do? There was no choice. She was alone in the world. After coming of age, she had to move out of the orphanage. Where to go? She didn't want to be homeless. So the orphanage graduate and settled in an old barracks with frightening neighbors. But Emily knew that time would pass. She would earn money for an apartment and move away from here to a good place. Now there was a fight brewing upstairs. Usually first there's drinking, fun, dancing, all brothers and sisters. Then there's bound to be conflict, even fights. Squealing, screaming, hitting, the sound of falling furniture and broken dishes. Emily is scared of it all, even though she's lived like this for 2 years. Sometimes drunken neighbors would get the wrong floor and break in her door. Often the debauches happened right under her windows, either fights or romantic scenes. Old Susan, the old lady for whom Emily shopped, was also wary of the neighbors. Emily was an attractive young girl. She should have gotten out of here. The people in this place were not good. Trouble could happen at any moment. Emily realized this, and dreamed of moving somewhere else. However, she didn't have that opportunity yet. In Emily's house repeatedly happened fires, almost always because of drunken neighbors. A guest from the top floor fell asleep with a cigarette on the couch, or the neighbor on the right forgot to remove the pot from the stove after getting drunk. Each time, the firefighters got there in time. But the unpleasant smell of burning was a lingering reminder of the incident. Emily was afraid that one day while she slept, a fire would start in the house. The only consolation was that her apartment was on the first floor, and she would be able to jump out quickly. Emily rolled over onto her other side, turning away from the fire. She should get some sleep. Tomorrow was a big day. There would be guests at the rich house where she worked as a maid. Some kind of family celebration. They need people to serve the guests and clean up. Emily will be a waitress. John Susan, an older man with gray hair and kind blue eyes, explained to the servants how to behave during the celebration. Nothing complicated. Don't talk to the guests. Don't attract attention. Slowly shuttle around the territory with a tray of snacks and drinks. Keep an eye on the invitees. If someone makes a sign, walk over so the person can have a treat. These will be people from a very different life. They never had to spend the night in an old barracks with creaks, piles of garbage, floors, and crowds of cockroaches. They don't have drunken neighbors keeping them up at night. These lucky people wear expensive fancy clothes, fly to exotic places with luxurious names, drive beautiful cars. A different world that Emily had only ever been able to observe from the outside. After a day of work in the midst of beauty and luxury, it was unpleasant and painful for Emily to return to her shabby apartment. From upstairs came swearing and profanity. A man's husky voice shouted foul language, and a woman's voice responded with equally harsh words. Emily covered her ears, not wanting to hear it. It was getting dreary. The gray life seemed bleak, joyless, and alien. Then Emily remembered her early childhood, a time when she was truly happy. A sunny summer morning. Her mother was tying her a beautiful bow. The girl admired her reflection in the mirror. Just a doll, smiled her mother, correcting the collar of the dress of her favorite daughter, and they would go to the park. Mom was on vacation. They didn't go to the sea. They didn't have enough money. Emily understood that perfectly well, even at the age of 7. But her mother promised to take her daughter to the amusement park and allowed her to choose any swings and merry-go-rounds without restrictions. How pleasant it was to walk hand in hand with her mother down the alley to the park, from where music, cheerful chatter, and children's laughter were already coming. It was light and joyful at heart. Emily felt beautiful and happy. And most importantly, her mother was near, always calm and warm. It was a pity that she had to work so much. But Emily understood otherwise. There was no other way, because they had no daddy, so Mom had to pull everything alone. Emily helped as much as she could, cleaning, even learning to cook simple dishes. Emily smiled as she lay in bed. The noise upstairs didn't bother her anymore. She thought of her mom, her slender silhouette, her long hair. Beautiful. What a clear voice she had. But her mother's face was lost in the fog. No matter how hard Emily tried, she couldn't remember its features. Probably because when they were separated forever, Emily was only 9 years old. She barely reached her mother's shoulder. Emily had always admired her mother's face. However, she rarely saw that face in everyday life. It was a shame, but it couldn't be helped. But she still had the pictures. An old, thick album, slightly battered by time. It was practically the only thing Emily had inherited from her mother, except for a simple pair of gold earrings, a chain, and her mother's dainty wristwatch, all of which Emily had received upon graduation from the orphanage. She had nothing else. Emily realized that she and her mother lived poorly and very lonely. Emily had no grandparents or uncles and aunts. It was true that her mom's friends often came to their small apartment. They brought Emily presents and played with her. It was fun and enjoyable, but still not the same. Emily was secretly jealous of her friends who went to visit their grandmothers every now and then. Listening to the girls' stories about the hot cakes and candy the old people gave them, Emily was envious. She, too, wished she had many relatives. The girl, still very young, felt some emptiness in her chest. But she couldn't express her feelings clearly. Sometimes she tried, but her mother hugged her and asked, "Is it bad together?" No, answered the girl. Of course she was happy with her mom. Emily did not want to upset her favorite person. Therefore, she tried not to ask questions about relatives. And suddenly Mom will think that Emily is bad with her since she dreams of someone else. One day, something strange happened. It was New Year's Eve. Mom had some guests over, her co-workers. They all together decorated the Christmas tree, cooked salads, joked a lot, laughed, and even led round dances to the joy of the girl. It was fun. And then Emily was tired and went to bed. And the adults continued the celebration in the kitchen. Emily heard muffled voices coming from there. Her friends were clearly engrossed in conversation. The girl was suddenly bored. She got out of bed and went to the bookcase, deciding to read a little, especially since someone from the guests gave her a big book of brightly colored fairy tales with pictures. But for some reason, the girl took a puffy photo album from the shelf. Emily liked to look at the pictures. The pictures were of her mom, either with friends or alone. Some of the photos preserved moments when Emily wasn't even alive yet. On others, she was already a newborn in a cradle and onesies. There were school pictures of Emily and fresh ones. That evening, the girl noticed that there was something under one of her mother's portraits. Emily gingerly ran her fingers under the picture and pulled out an old, folded in half photograph. It was wrinkled, as if someone had been looking at it for a long time. There were strangers looking at the girl from the picture. Among them was her mother, who was very young. Everyone had gathered in the flowering garden, apparently for a picnic, for they were sitting on a blanket spread under the trees. The men and women were smartly and richly dressed. A lady with a heavy gaze and regal posture stood out. High hairstyle, large eyebrows, a mole on her cheek resembling a bold drop of wine, bracelets, a massive necklace. This look somehow didn't fit with the picnic. Even 9-year-old Emily could see that. Strange, why had the photograph turned up hidden? And who were these people? The girl immediately had a lot of questions. And so she, grabbing the mysterious photo, went to the kitchen. "Oh, why aren't you asleep?" wondered Aunt Sandy, one of Mom's friends. She made a quick gesture to hide her cigarette under the table. Emily grinned, as if she hadn't noticed anything, as if she wasn't aware that adults were sneaking smokes from her. It was funny. "Are we making noise disturbing you?" No, Emily shook her head. "I found this interesting picture. I want to know about it." "What kind of picture?" With a smile, her mom held out her hand to the find. Emily saw the picture and turned pale. The smile fell off her face instantly. Aunt Cynthia peered over her mother's shoulder and grew serious as well. "Who's next to you?" Emily asked. "They're different, aren't they?" "They all are," her mother replied in an indifferent tone. "It's nothing special. I used to work with them, these people. They're your colleagues?" "Well, you could say that. Where did you all work together?" "Doing what?" Emily kept up. "Go to bed? It's late?" Her mother said quietly, pushing her daughter toward the kitchen. She left the picture with her. Emily walked out, closing the door behind her, but she didn't go into her room, instead lurking near the kitchen. She thought the adults were about to start discussing the photograph. The girl was not mistaken. "Why do you keep this picture?" Aunt Cynthia asked. "Why do you throw it away?" "I wanted to crumple it up and throw it in the garbage. But then I decided not to, because someday I guess I'll have to tell the truth. But not now, of course. She's just a little girl." Aunt Cynthia's voice was unusually quiet. She seemed to sense something. She saw the way Emily looked at her, like she recognized her grandmother, a call of the blood. No, her mother dismissed her friend's words. "She's just wearing necklaces, rings. The clothes are the most beautiful, flashy." And that mole on her cheek caught her eye. She liked attention. I don't know. I think Emily sensed something familiar, like some elusive trait or something. She did. She recognized her grandmother. I saw the way she looked at her. Oh, her grandmother was a bad person. No good. Emily's lucky she's far away from her. On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand. If Emily lived like a princess now, she'd never be denied anything. And me? I can't even take her to the seaside like a princess, said Aunt Susan contemptuously. Have you forgotten?
Was it a good thing to do to a baby? I remember that, but maybe things are different now, who knows? The conversation then turned to another subject, Aunt Cynthia's many admirers. Emily tiptoed to her bed, covered her head with the blanket, and thought. So that woman in the picture with the mole on her cheek, wearing the necklace, was her grandmother. But her mother had always said they were alone, that they had no one. Why hide the truth? And Aunt Susan said Grandma was a bad person. Why would she think that? What did Grandma do? We'd have to ask her mother about it.
Emily dreaded this conversation, seeing how her mother changed at the sight of the photograph, how frightened she was of something, even pale. Everything must be asked. Only later, when the moment was right. Her mother came quietly into the room. Emily pretended to be asleep. The woman took the album from the table, leafed through it, sighed, and returned the photograph to its place under her portrait. Since then, Emily had often looked at that picture. When her mother wasn't around, of course. The domineering woman with the cold and frankly contemptuous gaze was no stranger to her now. Emily knew it was her grandmother. Perhaps they would even see each other someday. That was Emily's last happy year. The next New Year's Eve she met at the Zaria orphanage. Confused, scared. Because in early December her mother was hit at a crosswalk by a drunk driver at high speed. She was not even taken to the hospital in time. Emily spent a few days with Aunt Cynthia, her mom's friend. And then people came, 2 men in uniform and a woman with a stern, cold stare. Aunt Cynthia gathered her favorite things and hugged her niece. Tears rolled from the woman's eyes. "I'll visit you," she promised. For several years in a row, she faithfully visited Emily at the orphanage once or even twice a month. The girl looked forward to these meetings. A familiar loved one reminded her of a past happy life, however. Then Susan met another man of her dreams and left with him to another city. Their dating stopped. By that time, Emily had already quite settled in the orphanage and even made friends. It turned out that life in the orphanage was quite tolerable. Children were well fed, clothed, taught, and entertained. They were taken to the movies, circus, and sent to summer camps. Of course, maternal love, care, and warmth Emily very much lacked. She often remembered her mother before going to bed, sometimes smiling and sometimes crying. In the orphanage, the girl learned about the surprising truth about herself. It turned out that her mom was not her own. Emily was about 14 years old when she accidentally overheard the conversation of the educators. The women were discussing the difficult fates of children in the hall after the holiday. They'd had a few drinks, relaxed, and their tongues were loose and their guard was down. The educators were sitting on a sofa in the hall. They thought everyone was asleep by now, for about half an hour ago they had been called out. But Emily was on duty that night, which meant cleaning up after everyone else. She was the one the kindergartners were discussing. What's Emily's fate? Sighed Alana, a full woman with huge glasses. One has to think about it. After all, she was left an orphan. They say lightning never strikes twice her partner. A very young girl named Emma shook her head. And something incredible has already happened to Emily. Emily, who was walking nearby, froze and listened. Something very strange was happening. You know, she was dropped off to this woman, right on her doorstep, just like in the Middle Ages, Alana clarified. Apparently someone knew she was dreaming of children, but God wouldn't let her. We're all aware of it here, Emma nodded. Emily is such a beauty. She has so much innate nobility about her. I wonder who her real parents are. Maybe the daughter of some rich people walking around? Got rid of the disgrace. No, objected a colleague. More likely some alcoholics planted her. Who else does that to children? My mom wasn't my own. Emily couldn't hide any longer. She needed to know for sure. The kindergartners were embarrassed by the gossip. But the way back was closed. Emily had heard everything. You would have found out anyway, but later, at graduation, Alana admitted quietly. You were dropped off by your foster mom. And then she died, and you were orphaned again. Don't worry, you're an adult. You'll be back on your feet soon, and it won't matter anymore, Emma encouraged. Do you know anything about my real parents? No, Alana looked at Emily with pity. Your mom didn't even try to find out anything. Probably was glad she had you and was afraid the relatives would take you away. Emily returned to the bedroom. She had learned the truth of her fate. The news seemed like it should have shocked her. But somehow the girl remained calm and even cool-headed. Did it matter whether her mother was her own or not? The main thing was that they were very happy together. The girl had no doubt that her mother loved her. Later, Emily began to think about her real parents. Who are they? What made them give? Up the child. Are they still alive?
Does she look like them? The girl realized that when she grew up, she would definitely try to find them. However, she had no idea where to start looking for them. She had no information about her relatives, except that Cynthia, A close friend of her foster mother might have known something. Surely they must have shared secrets with each other, but finding Cynthia herself would be difficult. A few more years passed. Emily came of age and left the orphanage. She was given a modest inheritance, simple jewelry of her mother, an old photo album and the keys to the apartment. The first thing the girl did was to check if the mysterious photo with the bossy woman and her grandmother was still there. I wonder if it was her real grandmother or her adopted grandmother. Probably couldn't tell now.
At first, Emily was in complete shock at the apartment she had received from the state. Of course, she was very frightened by the new neighbors. It was not easy for the girl to adapt in the orphanage. She had friends. Teachers supported her. But now, in her new life, she found herself completely alone. She had to learn everything on her own: cooking, cleaning, paying for utilities. Emily could not get a job as a cook. They would not take her anywhere without experience. So she got a job as a cleaner, cleaning the entrances of apartment buildings. The hard work took a lot of effort, and the pay was low. But there was no choice. She had to live on something and pay the bills. One of Emily's partners, Aunt Susan, once pitied the girl. "It is clear why I clean at my age. It is just a part-time job to buy gifts for grandchildren. And you are young, beautiful. Can't you find something better?"
If they won't hire you as a cook, why don't you try a job as a maid in a rich house? They'll hire you for sure. You're as pretty as a picture. And rich people appreciate beauty. Emily decided to take Susan's advice. In the evening, she called several advertisements for maids. She didn't like the first house. The owner was too frank in his scrutiny of the young girl, but the second place attracted her much more. The interview was conducted by a stately grey-haired manager, John. It turned out that the owner of the house is an older woman, but Emily may never meet her, as she is hired to work in the guest houses and on the grounds. The main house has its own staff of servants. When John named the salary, Emily knew she had to get the job. "Thank you for your time," John smiled charmingly, signaling that the conversation was over.
"We have a few more candidates today, but I'll be honest, you've made the best impression on me. So wait for the call. I'll probably call you back." John walked Emily the other way. They descended a staircase with carved railings, and the girl had a stunning view of paradise before her. Wooden lounge chairs under umbrellas, slender palm trees, and a huge pool of fancifully shaped turquoise water. On the side of the pool sat a tanned, handsome boy of about 15 with merry eyes, exposing his body to the sun's rays. Emily and a slightly younger girl were lying on a lounge chair by the pool. She was wearing a white swimsuit, emphasizing her stunning tan. Next to her was a guy. They both seemed very nice and handsome to Emily. She couldn't help but admire them. These teenagers lived in a completely different world, unaware of the existence of dysfunctional neighborhoods where children grow up unsupervised while their parents wait for government benefits. Emily sighed, wishing she were in their shoes, sunbathing by the pool, swimming in the turquoise water. "These are the landlady's grandchildren," John explained, noticing her interest. "They're well-mannered and good kids. But if you stay to work for us, you need to know this: do not approach the hosts or guests unless necessary. If you are needed, you will be called." Emily nodded. John's words hurt her unpleasantly. She immediately felt like a second-class citizen. However, she really needed this job. If the owners paid her the promised amount, she could save up for a new place to live. Besides, it was so nice to work here, not like scrubbing dirty entrances day after day. That evening, John called back and told her that Emily had been hired. After that, she couldn't sleep for a long time with excitement, making plans for the future. For almost a year now, Emily has been working at the house. She gets up at 6 a.m., goes to the bus stop, takes a long bus ride to the bus terminal, and from there it's a long walk to the owner's house. But she's used to it. The pay is good, the work is not difficult, the conditions are more than excellent, and she is fed heartily in the kitchen. She can be patient. In the course of her work, Emily has made friends with the cooks Kevin and Alex, the janitor Fred, and the young maids Melanie and Roxy. Even John had developed a warm relationship with her. He seemed to pity her as an orphan, though he tried not to show it was out of status. There were servants from the main house, where the mistress herself lived. Emily hardly ever crossed paths with them, as their territories did not touch. She was responsible for order in 4 small guest houses and gazebos, where relatives and acquaintances of the mistress often rested. Guests came all the time, and someone always lived in one of the cabins. Some people showed up regularly, others only once or twice during the whole time. So Emily, Melanie, and Roxy were always busy. Often relatives, grown children, grandchildren came to visit. But they stayed in the main house with their mother and grandmother. This mansion looked like a palace with white walls, monumental look, and luxurious elements of decoration: columns, stucco, winding staircases, huge windows, balconies of bizarre shapes. All this looked solemn and very expensive. Emily never went inside the main house. She was not allowed inside. The servants lived there, whom she hardly knew, but saw only from a distance stern women and trim men in uniforms. They looked down on the rest of the servants. Emily decided that working in the main house was the ultimate privilege with higher salaries. She was interested in looking inside and seeing how things worked, but couldn't. In an entire year, Emily had never once met the landlady in person. Sometimes she saw her from afar, when she was walking to her car or entering the house. But it was rare, and she'd never gotten a good look at her. She was tall, straight as a stick, always beautifully dressed in the summer, wearing her usual wide-brimmed hat and half-face sunglasses. In the cold season, again in a hat with brim, but warm and wearing a black coat. You couldn't see his face behind such a disguise, but Emily had gotten a good look at her hostess's gait. The woman never went down to the pool. Fred explained to the curious Emily that the big house also has a huge pool, with a bridge and even a small waterfall. Emma Susan swims only in it. The girl immediately wanted to see this miracle, but access to the house was closed to her. In the outdoor pool in the summer loved to splash in guests and hostesses, friends, grandchildren, and numerous relatives. At certain hours, the servants were allowed to swim there. Emily never missed an opportunity to take a dip in the clear, cool water. At those moments, she felt like a mermaid and tried not to think about the fact that after all this luxury, she would have to return to her apartment to listen to the neighbors scolding, inhale the unpleasant smells of poverty and desolation, and see the grayness and squalor around her. But she's not the only one. Her new friends Melanie and Roxy, they also have a difficult fate. Melanie was raised by her grandmother from an early age, because the girl never had a father, and Mom started a new life, where the eldest daughter had no place. And Roxy literally ran away from her family. She lived in the village, parents drank, gave birth to children. And it was Roxy who had to look after the whole horde. The girl always dreamed of a better life, and after graduating from school rushed to the city. She planned to go to university, but it didn't work out. But she found a good job, got a job in a rich house. Of course, the girl's servants often discussed their mysterious mistress and their daily work. Maybe she was hiding from everyone because of her terrible scars. Roxy speculated. She loved soap operas and had a vivid imagination. What if her jealous lover poured something on her when she was young? Or they were in a terrible accident together when they were hiding from relatives? Didn't approve of their union. Oh, come on, the practical Melanie waved her hand at her. He just doesn't think we're worthy of his attention. That's why she always passes us by. Are we just bugs to her? Sometimes Fred the janitor joined the conversation. I heard that she had some grief in her life a long time ago. But she still can't get over it. She's our landlady. I heard John talking to the servants in the cottage about it, saying that the mistress is sad today because it's an anniversary, a misfortune. What kind of misfortune? I didn't understand. Through such conversations, the image of the mistress became more and more mysterious and mysterious. Emily wanted to see her up close and personal, but she was never able to do so. One day, John overheard the gossip of the young people. Don't you have enough work to do? Why do you talk with your tongues? Emily and the other young servants were not afraid of him. The strictness of the major of the house was contrived, and the workers themselves worked hard, tried. The salaries were decent, and no one wanted to lose his place. So their work was not to be faulted. But John, as a manager by status, is supposed to remain firm and rigid. Tell us about the landlady, Emily asked bluntly. I wondered why she was so distant, so mysterious. She doesn't go out into the garden. It was a risky request. He could get angry and call the girl a curious barbarian, judging and sticking his nose where it didn't belong. That would have been quite in his nature. But the man suddenly, to the surprise and delight of the three friends, opened up Pamela as a golden person. She's kind, generous, which you couldn't help but notice. She does a lot for her sons and grandchildren. She also helps poor children. That's great, smiled Emily. But why such mystery and detachment? Someone is always coming to see her, and she doesn't talk to anyone but her closest friends. Well, first of all, the mistress is already in years. At your age, you want to have fun and socialize. And people like Pamela and I prefer peace and quiet. Don't be modest, you didn't make eye contact. The house majordomo did. Roxy, you're a big girl. I was, John grinned at her, and continued, but fate is often unfair. There was once in Pamela's life a great sorrow died her only daughter, the youngest and late child. Clever girl, beautiful, the favorite of the whole family. And after all, how sudden and terrible everything happened. The girl flew to study in England, and the plane was in a plane crash. Of course, no one survived. Wow, Melanie couldn't help but sigh. So finish your theories about the mistress to build. You think I can't hear you talking? Scars. Unhappy love. John gave Roxy an expressive look. Well, ever since then, Pamela has been averse to noisy society, socializing and all that. She seldom gives soirees, only on the most solemn occasions. It tires her. She's changed a lot since the tragedy, and now she's getting older. So that's the story. There's nothing mysterious about the landlady. Just an unhappy person. Emily thought long and hard about the majordomo's words. It turns out that you can have all this beauty and still be unhappy. Emily rolled onto her other side again, looking out the window. In the light of the street lamp, night insects were hovering. Crumbs of them were reaching for the light at the upstairs neighbors. Everything seemed to have quieted down. Finally, the girl closed her eyes. Quiet, good calm. Emily didn't notice how she fell into a long-awaited sleep. The morning began, as usual, with the shrill ringing of the alarm clock. She struggled to open her eyelids. She had fallen asleep very late last night. She desperately wanted to spend at least half an hour in bed, but she couldn't, because the bus wouldn't wait for her. Emily struggled to get her head off the pillow and walked into the bathroom with her eyes still closed. A cool shower was always invigorating. The girl had a quick breakfast of a sausage sandwich and coffee. Melanie had said that someday the habit of such a breakfast would turn Emily into a fat woman, one who couldn't fit into decent clothes. But so far, the irregular gastronomic habits had had no effect on the girl's figure. Emily pulled on short denim shorts and a long, wide t-shirt, made a high ponytail, put her feet in sneakers, threw her backpack with a swimsuit, phone and purse over her shoulders and left the house. At this hour, all her non-traveling neighbors were usually asleep, resting from the night's adventures. So walking down the road leading to the bus stop was even pleasant. But in the evening, Emily was always a little afraid to come home. She was especially scared of Kevin, the local first guy in the village. He even seemed to be working somewhere in the city, but like all his companions, he managed to drink almost every day, not denying himself the pleasure of having another affair. But everyone knew that Kevin had his eye on Emily. That was what frightened the girl, because if one day Kevin went from trying to get to know her more intimately to taking action, there would be no one to protect her. She was all alone. It would be good to go to work at the central cottage. The servants from there rarely leave the house. They even have a separate wing where they live. I wish Emily could do that too, she thought. And then Emily spent an hour traveling through the city on a half-empty bus. On the next trip, the bus would be crowded with people rushing to work, so that there would be no place for an apple to fall. In the meantime, it was quiet, calm, and peaceful. Emily even had time for a little nap. She opened the servant's gate with her own key and found herself in the garden. It was deafening, dizzying with scents the grass had not yet recovered from the dew. Emily inhaled a full breath and smiled. How nice, beautiful, pleasant, and most importantly, safe. Hi. Alex smiled at her friend. She almost always came before everyone else. She lived nearby. Roxy had already had time to change into her uniform, a strict dress of soft pink color with buttons. Good morning. John is gathering us all at 8:30 in the big gazebo. He has some important announcement. Either about today's guests or something else happened. All right, I'll get changed and I'll be there. This was unusual in Emily's memory. It was the first time the master of the house had organized a general meeting. Usually he gave his orders in person. This was an intrigue. When Emily arrived at the gazebo, everyone was already gathered there, including the almost unfamiliar servants from the main house. Her friends waved her over to join us. They took a seat for her. Well, it looks like we're all here now, John said, looking around at his subordinates. We're good to go. It turned out that in 2 weeks' time the hostess had an anniversary. On this occasion, a big celebration is planned. About 100 guests, Invited musicians, artists John listed. In the evening after the concert, fireworks. The event is big and responsible. I want everyone to understand that on this day everything should be at the highest level. It turned out that the efforts of the people at the cottage were not enough to serve the guests. Melanie, Roxy, and Emily, as young, pretty, and quick-witted as they are, were planned to be waitresses. Could we manage? Melanie hesitated. I've never catered a banquet before. Of course you'll be brief, John reassured her. In fact, it's nothing new. You've done the same thing before. It's just a bigger event than usual. Emily remained calm outwardly, but in her heart she was jubilant. She would finally be allowed into the house. She'd wanted to go there for so long, and she would be able to get a good look at her mistress. And the holiday promised to be big. There would be dressed-up guests, musicians, singers. Fireworks are planned. There'll be something to see. From then on, the house was filled with talk of the upcoming celebration. John, as promised, instructed the future waitresses. It turned out nothing complicated. Walk with a tray around the room and watch the guests. If someone makes a sign, go up to that person and offer appetizers or drinks, always with a polite smile. Emily had done something like this several times before at holiday meals, but now it was much more serious, and the event itself was to be held at the mysterious center cottage. With a slight polite smile, John said indignantly, glaring at Roxy, "Why are you smiling with all 32 teeth? Be softer, calmer, more elegant. Look at your friend." Emily smiled. She was really good at it. John praised her grace and coordination, setting her as an example to others. And remember, he said for the 100th time, don't forget the main rule: no unnecessary talking, glances, or personal contact with guests. You must blend in with the interior, be just an addition to it, not draw attention to yourself. Melanie nodded gravely. "We'll try." "I promise," Roxy said. Closer to the party, the decorators arrived. They decorated the garden with garlands and light fountains, put transparent statues, even built a pond with large fish. As the solemn event approached, Emily became more and more nervous. But her interest grew. One day the servants were brought in to try on a festive uniform for the event. For men, maroon pants and a plaid vest. For women, a vest and skirt of the same shade. Strict business style. "It suits you very well," admired friends, looking at Emily. "You're a real model." Emily smiled. She liked it very much herself. She had never dressed so strictly and businesslike before. Jeans, t-shirts, light sundresses. It turns out that the office style really suited her. And now, finally, the long-awaited day had come. The night before, Emily hadn't slept much. The neighbors were walking, then overhead noise, then wandered with laughter and songs under the windows. But it was the excitement that kept her awake the most. All these preparations for the anniversary are behind us. And tomorrow the culmination. A grandiose celebration. If only everything went smoothly. The next day, the waitress's dress rehearsal was scheduled, and John led the girls into the central cottage for the first time. Emily even felt dizzy at first at how spacious it was. A huge space in which the huge corner sofas and comfortable armchairs were lost. There were long tables along the walls. "Like I said, there's going to be a buffet," John said. Everything was bright, clean, glossy. Emily couldn't stop looking around. Upstairs was a wide staircase with a comfortable banister. What was on the second floor? One could only guess. The room where the banquet was planned didn't look like a living space. Beautiful, spacious, but too formal. Emily didn't see any of the little things that could tell something about the hostess's personality: photographs, statuettes, paintings. It was as cold and aloof as Pamela herself. John grinned as he looked at the surprised girls. "What? Impressed? Of course you are, it's so big. That's why I brought you here in advance, so you wouldn't open your mouths in front of the guests," he said. "And in general, whatever you see, keep yourself in control. Stay calm. Why does she need such a big house?" Roxy continued to wonder. "And those guest houses, and the huge garden. I don't understand." "It's none of your business," John said, clearly unhappy with her statement. The time before dinner flew by in a flurry of activity and preparation. Then the girls were told to rest, so that they wouldn't be tired in the evening. The friends didn't mind. They settled down in the servants' wing and lay on the sofa until the evening, chatting and watching light serials. Strange sounds came from the garden. It was musicians tuning their instruments. A little later, the artists and singers arrived. people from their team spent a long time fiddling with lighting and electronics, preparing the stage. Time flew by quickly. At 6 p.m., an excited John came in and told the girls to change. "Is it really starting already?" The girls looked at each other with excitement. Emily felt something cold rumbling in her stomach. The guests began to arrive, men in perfectly tailored suits, women in evening gowns. They looked like performers from rich living movies. And though Emily had promised John not to stare, she couldn't help but stare openly at the arrivals, the outfits, the jewelry, the accessories. She'd never seen such splendor in the stores. Obviously, they'd bought their clothes elsewhere. Emily, dazzled by the luxury of the evening, did not even recognize Christina, the granddaughter of the hostess. Usually she dressed like a teenager, but tonight she looked like a princess. Her flowing, long golden dress was beautifully fitted. Her long hair was arranged in an elegant bun. The girl admired the young beauty. "Don't forget why you're here," John whispered softly in her ear. "Why are you three so confused?" Emily pulled herself together and walked slowly down the hall with a tray, just as she'd been trained to do all week. The hostess was here, too. She appeared to be in her 70s. But Pamela didn't look her age, tall, statuesque, in an elegant long gown, with natural makeup and exquisite jewelry. She held herself with dignity, but at the same time she was friendly, smiling at the guests, trying to pay attention to everyone. For some reason, Pamela seemed vaguely familiar to Emily. She even shared it with Melanie. "Wow," her friend grinned. "You've been working here for a year, and you've seen her many times, even from afar. She should be familiar to you." "Oh, I think my name is." But Emily disagreed with Melanie. Yes, she'd seen her landlady in passing, but her face was always hidden by her glasses and hat brim. No, now Emily saw her face for the first time, and it did seem familiar. Strange. One day Emily had walked up close to Pamela as she was talking to a gray-haired man, and he had called a waitress over to take a glass of champagne. Pamela was distracted for a moment, glancing away, and then returned to the conversation. The girl had time to notice a small scar on her hostess's cheek, a small indentation. The evening went on as usual. The guests moved into the garden. There was a stage on which the musicians put on an enchanting show. On the big screen behind their backs appeared amazingly realistic pictures of forest, then mountains, then in general some fantastic landscapes. Some of the artists were unfamiliar to Emily, while others she often saw on the TV screen. Real stars came to congratulate Pamela. Emily could not even imagine how much the celebration had cost the hostess. It didn't fit with John's words that Pamela didn't like noisy society, fuss and so on. Emily asked her husband about it at home during the concert. He, seeing that the party was going well, was in a good mood, and so he answered, however, with some strange phrase, "Kings can do anything." "And kings can do anything," the man sang, winking at Emily. She didn't understand. Her position obliged her. What's not to understand? It's a status requirement to throw an anniversary party. That's what they do. I see now. Pamela is tired. She doesn't like it. Can't you tell? Emily glanced at her hostess. She looked energetic and enthusiastic. But perhaps her husband knows her better. He might know better. The guests were having fun, singing along to the artists. Some of them even danced. There were amazingly beautiful light fountains everywhere. Garlands hung by designers turned the garden into a setting for a magical fairy tale. Finally, the concert ended. Pamela's sons, grown, solid men, came on stage and made an insanely moving speech. Emily almost cried and keenly felt her own orphanhood. They were grown-up, established businessmen. They have families and big children themselves. But how much they needed Emma, how much they loved her. You could feel it in every word of these men. Then the guests spoke. They said a lot of nice words about the Jubilee. Alex didn't know what an amazing person her hostess was. It turns out that she is engaged in charity, helps sick children and orphans, supervises several orphanages. Now Alex found out about it. At the end, they prepared a surprise for Pamela, a video about her life with beautiful music. On a huge screen mounted on the stage, photos flashed. At first black and white. On them, Pamela was very young, thin, angular, with a kind of uncertain, timid look, little resembling the powerful woman she was now. Wedding pictures, pictures from work, photos on the doorstep of the maternity ward, family photos where Pamela is surrounded by her family, her husband, 2 boys and a tiny girl. This must be the daughter who died in the plane crash. How sad. Pamela changed, became tougher, more confident. She liked to dress lavishly and flamboyantly. Now she posed in beautiful outfits and massive jewelry rings, earrings, chains. There was something unpleasant in her eyes. Was it contempt? No. Alex liked the modern Pamela much better. But that middle-aged mistress from the photos reminded Alex desperately of someone. The girl couldn't figure out who. And then she saw her. A familiar picture. From the big screen, Alex was looking at the woman from the picture her mom had once hidden from her. Kind of like her grandmother had loved her. It was so unexpected that the girl dropped her tray. Fortunately, everyone was engrossed in the spectacle. No one even noticed it. The heavy necklace around her neck, the stern look, the mole on her cheek. There was no mistaking it. It was surprising to see a familiar photograph on the big screen. The frame changed. Pamela was rapidly growing up on the screen. Milestones of her life flashed by at high speed. Alex stood thunderstruck. Maybe she was just imagining things. Could it be? Hardly. Now the girl realized who her hostess reminded her of the very woman from the mysterious photo. Except that there was no mole on her cheek now. But in its place there was a scar, a small depression. Alex noticed it as she walked by. Probably Pamela at one point simply got rid of the natural ornament, removed the mole. So what's it look like? Alex works at her grandmother's house. If her mom were alive, she'd answer all the questions. But now we have to find out the truth on our own. And it has to be subtle, not blunt. Then there was a festive fireworks. Multicolored flashes bloomed in the sky. Some of them took fanciful forms: heart, rainbow, stars. Everyone in the garden admired the fireworks. People's faces were looking up, and only Alex was looking solely at Pamela. Her face reflected blue, red, and green reflections. The birthday girl was smiling. Alex scrutinized every feature of her face and realized more and more clearly that yes, this was the woman from the photo. After the party, Alex stayed overnight in the servants' wing. There was no point in going home. The guests had left at midnight, and it was already time to get up. Especially at this hour, it wasn't safe to walk around the neighborhood where Alex lived. Roxy had gone home. She was renting an apartment nearby. Melanie stayed in the outhouse too. The girls made themselves comfortable on the big couch, turned off the light. Tomorrow was going to be a long and laborious day of cleaning. Of course, additional people had been hired, but there was still a lot of work to do. Melanie fell asleep quickly. But Alex, of course, couldn't sleep. What had she seen today? What did it mean? She wanted to share the news with someone. But Alex realized she shouldn't. It became unbearably stuffy. Alex got up and opened the window. Night freshness was blowing from the street. The girl decided to take a little walk in the garden. Maybe she would get tired and fall asleep after all. It was dark in the garden. Lanterns were burning only on the porch of the big cottage. The guest cottages were packed to the brim tonight. Muffled conversations came from there. Apparently Emily had slept well after the party. The girl walked over to the pool, sat down on the edge, and looked at the cottage. Somewhere out there right now, Pamela is asleep or awake, Emily thought. Emily wanted to ask her a lot of questions, but the hostess was practically out of reach. How to approach her, where to start a conversation. But one thing Emily knew for sure: she would make up her mind. She would find a way to find out. A week had passed since the anniversary. Life went on as usual. Emily went to work every day, ran John's errands, talked to Melanie and Roxy. Only now there was always that mysterious photograph in her pocket. Emily waited for the moment when Pamela would meet. And then Emily would boldly approach her, show her the photograph, and ask the questions that had been nagging at her since the anniversary. But time passed. Pamela sometimes glimpsed somewhere in the distance, then to the parking lot, went to the house. Then a quick step went into the house, or in general appeared not alone, but accompanied by relatives or acquaintances. The right moment never came. It was tormenting Emily. "Emily, you haven't been the same lately," Melanie said one day, pale, anxious. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Emily smiled. She didn't want to tell anyone, not even her closest friends, about her story yet. "Maybe you're in love?" Roxy asked with a sly look in her eyes. Emily sighed. If only it were that simple. One day the girl made up her mind. If the mountain does not go to Mohammed, Emily realized it is necessary to act more actively. The moment when Pamela would accidentally get in her way, there might not be. It was early September. The days were sunny and warm. The air was filled with dizzying aromas of blooming herbs. Bright butterflies fluttered. And by evening, it was getting crisp. Emily liked this time. She was cleaning the gazebo near the central cottage. Today, Pamela's guests were having dinner here, an elderly couple with a little boy, a grandson perhaps. The hostess herself was not with them. Pamela had gone into town on business this morning. Emily now knew that the hostess spent a lot of time on charity, supervising foundations, orphanages, and hospitals. Emily was just checking the wide, long table in the gazebo when she saw them. Pamela and John were walking down the path to the house, talking quietly about something. The hostess, as usual, was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. I couldn't see her face, but her gait, her posture, her figure. No, Emily would never mistake Pamela for anyone else. John gallantly opened the door for the lady. She smiled at him and stepped inside, and the man approached Emily. Well done, he praised the girl's work. Quick, clean, as always. The man was clearly in a high mood, and he wanted everyone around him to smile. Apparently, the conversation with the hostess had been pleasant. When he left, Emily put the rag aside, glanced around the house, fumbled for the doubled-up photograph in her pocket. Sigh. Now or never, she thought. Emily slowly approached the door, glancing around every now and then. It seemed that John or one of the household servants was about to appear. Of course, they would scold her. After all, Emily knew perfectly well that she wasn't allowed to enter this house without permission. It is not her territory. She is not on the staff of the privileged servants whose duties include the upkeep of the cottage. Emily felt like a trespasser, almost a criminal, when she took the doorknob. Still, she took the step and found herself back in the spacious hall. Without the long tables along the walls, it seemed even larger and more spacious than Emily remembered from the anniversary. The girl stood for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the house. From somewhere came the muffled clinking of dishes and voices. It must have been the servants. Here would be the story if one of them came out into the hall and saw her looking around. She would be rudely ushered out the door, complaining about the insolent maid to John. And John? He'll probably fire her for all the good he's done her. Because there are strict rules. They're even spelled out in the employment contract. And Emily was brazenly breaking them right now. The girl sighed. Well, the first step has been taken. We have to go all the way. There was no turning back, and she headed straight for the wide staircase that led to the second floor. The landlady was definitely there. Emily easily ran down the steps and was confused again. A wide hallway, many doors. Where to go? At least there was no one there. Pamela came out to Emily on her own. She came around the corner from somewhere. She was wearing a beautiful homemade suit, satin, or silk oversized black pants, and an elegant tunic to match. There was a flicker of surprise in the landlady's eyes at the sight of the girl. But anger Emily did not notice. "You're the girl who looks after the grounds and the guest houses, aren't you?" Pamela asked, giving Emily a glance. Her heart thudded with excitement, and her legs felt strangely woozy. But worst of all was her tongue, which didn't want to turn. "Yes," Emily finally said. "In that case, what are you doing up here? Did John explain the rules to you?" Pamela didn't seem angry or accusing. Her tone was neutral and calm. But still, Emily was gripped by panic. The girl slipped her hand into her pocket, fumbled for the photograph again. The feel of the heavy paper in her fingers suddenly gave her confidence. I need to talk to you," the girl blurted out. Pamela's eyes became interested. I guess it wasn't every day that servants came to her with such requests, and there must have been something about Emily's appearance that caught her attention. "I suggest you go to my room," Pamela said, and moved down the hall. Emily followed her, marveling at her own courage and at how the situation was playing out. The landlady hadn't yelled at her, hadn't called someone to have the brazen intruder kicked out the door. She talks to her calmly, respectfully. And now it's unfathomable. Pamela takes her, the girl in the pink uniform, into her room to listen. Pamela's spacious room had many mirrors, further visualizing the space. Emily took one look at herself, pale, disheveled, anxious. A pitiful sight. Maybe Pamela just felt sorry for her. The woman settled into a chair in front of the round table on molded legs. Emily gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite. Now I'm listening to you very carefully. Apparently you do have something to say. Under Pamela's scrutinizing gaze, Emily was again a little confused. She couldn't think of the right words. The thing is. Where to start? The girl hesitated, feeling pathetic and stupid. And then suddenly she took a photograph out of her pocket and put it in the center of the table. Pamela took the picture in her hands and studied it for a long time. Emily stared at her hostess's face and tried to understand how she felt. But Pamela was perfectly able to keep herself in control. The girl did not see a single emotion. She even experienced despair. Suddenly she felt that in the rollers for the Jubilee was this very photo. Suddenly the owner now will return the photo to her with the question, well, what next? But it turned out differently. Where did you get that picture? Pamela asked. My mother gave it to me. Who's your mom? What's her name? Where is she? The usual mask of coldness and indifference was gradually slipping from her face. Pamela became more and more like an ordinary woman. An amazing metamorphosis. Emily immediately felt more confident. My mom's name was Susan. Well, she was, but she died when I was only 9. Susan, Pamela said thoughtfully. Who would have thought it? Katie, no surprise there. Emily looked at her hostess intently. Pamela's gaze was absent, as if she were thinking somewhere in the past. It was clear that the photograph meant something to her, that there was a connection between them. That's my mom, Emily jabbed her finger at the skinny girl on the left. Yes, I remember her well. Jenny served with us for a few years. Good girl, efficient, calm, but I fired her. I was a different person back then. Tell me, who raised you after Jenny was gone? Pamela asked. I grew up in an orphanage, Emily answered. Pamela looked at her pityingly, barely holding back tears. Emily saw it perfectly well. It's my fault. I meant well, and I've done this, Pamela said with strange, incomprehensible words. I've ruined your life and my daughter's. I'm so sorry for you. Jenny, said Emily firmly. I heard her talking to a friend of hers once. I understood from it that the woman in the picture was you when you were young. My grandmother, Emily, lied, deciding to go all in. She had waited too long for this moment to miss the big question. I guess so, Pamela nodded, looking at Emily. The DNA test would clear things up for sure. But it's just a formality. I can see the nose, the eyes, the lip line, an amazing resemblance. Explain everything to me, Emily pleaded. I don't understand anything at all. I'm even a little scared. Of course I will, Pamela nodded. Now we'll have plenty of time to understand and learn. I just can't believe it, we've been looking for you for so long, sending out inquiries, even hiring detectives. And here you are, after all these years, when there's no hope left. Pamela began a long story, speaking quietly, measuredly, calmly, stopping at times and shaking her head in disbelief. She had graduated from the Polytechnic Institute, specializing as an engineer. On assignment, she was sent on an internship in a distant city. It happened often then. Pamela did not mind, she always liked adventure. There, at a large factory, she had met her fate, Tom, despite the youth of the already master, to whom the adult men obeyed. Intelligent, determined, energetic, he immediately attracted Pamela. I still could not believe my happiness, she shared with Emily. All the women in the factory were making eyes at him, and he chose me, unremarkable, with this ugly mole on my cheek. How I hated it, how many complexes I had because of it. I got rid of it the first chance I got. Tom made me believe I was beautiful. They got married and got a tiny studio apartment from the factory. But it was better than a hostel. They didn't live poorly, but they had enough. They had enough for food, clothes, entertainment, but they didn't have to be lavish. Soon they had a son. Tom was over the moon. And Pamela dreamed of having a daughter. I have dreamed of a girl since childhood, she admitted. I imagined how I would dress her up in beautiful dresses, tie puffy bows. And here is a boy. And what a boy, our eldest, Jason, from a small age, was a tomboy and a fighter for the truth, a real hurricane. Pamela smiled warmly as she talked about her son's childhood. Emily watched her face with all her eyes. She wasn't used to seeing her mistress so human yet. All in all, the son turned out wonderful. But I never gave up the dream of having a daughter, Pamela continued. I was sure that next time I would be lucky. I persuaded my husband to have a second child, but John didn't want to. At first the apartment is small, the three of us can barely fit. But then he gave in. So the family had another boy instead of the desired daughter. Pamela somehow even calmed down. The third child they would certainly not pull. So such is the fate the mama boys to be. Sons pleased, grew healthy and smart, distinguished. At school they helped at home. I simply adored them and would never trade any of them for a daughter. But looking at moms, walking hand in hand with little princesses, still longed. The dream of having a daughter hasn't gone anywhere. The woman simply drove it into the recesses of her subconscious because she realized that there was no way they could afford a third child. And then came the hard times, those very hungry 90s. The factory went bankrupt. John was left without a job. In the design office where I worked, the wages began to be delayed. Then, of course, they gave me several months' paychecks at once. But not in money, but in coupons to stores where the prices were so high that you couldn't even get near them. It was hard, Pamela recalled. John, a longtime engineer, worked part-time as a loader or janitor. Interrupted small casual earnings because there was no other way out. I knitted to order. Even the boys worked, looking for and handing in bottles, washing cars. And still there was a catastrophic lack of money. But that's how everyone lived then. It was all perceived as commonplace, wasn't it? What's a daughter? I'd rather put my sons on their feet. And then John took a risk. Together with two former colleagues, organized a construction and installation company. All the founders had experience and connections after all. They had worked at the factory for so many years. At first, things went shakily. The enterprise did not bring money. On the contrary, the last crumbs were pulled out of the family budget. I did not believe in success, admitted Pamela. I scolded John, called him a fool, suggested that he go yard sweeping, instead of spending time on something incomprehensible. He didn't say a word, didn't argue. I can imagine how upset I made him. But my husband is not the kind of man to give up. Soon the business of the novice businessman went uphill. And within a year the family, from almost beggarly to more than wealthy. We bought a new apartment, a 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood. We got a car. I did not deny myself anything, bought beautiful dresses and shoes, jewelry, said Pamela. All this caused the envy of others, and she simply changed the circle of communication. Even then, everyone who did not have such wealth began to seem to me completely insignificant. And yet I was like that myself not so long ago. Strange, but this fact somehow completely erased from my mind. More on that later. The small firm became a large corporation. John has foreign partners. And that's a whole other level. The family moved to a prestigious cottage community. They got servants in this very house with a pool. Now I didn't have to cook or clean. Hired people did all that. A woman could take care of her children and herself. Wealth spoiled me, Pamela admitted. I couldn't cope with the sudden wealth that came over my head. Engaged, simply put, looked at people who do not have such capital as garbage. Dressed flashily, wearing jewelry, even going on a picnic in the garden. Just like in this picture. It's funny even. I didn't think about children anymore. My condition now allowed it, but age. At that time, women over 35 were already considered beyond reproductive age. And yet, when I realized one day that I was pregnant, I didn't even think about termination. I felt it was a long-awaited daughter. Pamela smiled, looking at Emily. And so it turned out to be. Hannah was born, Mommy and Daddy's joy, the long-awaited princess girl. The boys were all grown up now, and here was a sweet baby again, and a daughter at last, Pamela recalled. She was enjoying motherhood in a new way. Now she had money, for Hannah hired a nanny who took the lion's share of care for the baby. Pamela got only the most pleasant things: walks, outfits, visits to theaters and cafes. Just as she had once dreamed. Even better, because even in her wildest dreams she could not have imagined that she would be able to dress her daughter in such outfits. Hannah grew up in love and total acceptance. She was adored by her parents, her older brothers, and everyone around her. Such an open and pleasant child she was. But favorable appearance not the only thing that nature gifted Hannah. The girl also turned out to be very talented. Since childhood she drew so that people looked and could not believe that these paintings are the result of the labor of a small child. Hannah first attended an art school, then a prestigious design center. Her parents were not stingy. Expensive paints, pencils, additional lessons with the best specialists in the city, anything to make their only daughter's talent flourish and develop. It was at this design center that she met your father. She was just 17 at the time. She was finishing high school. We were planning to send her to study in England, preparing her for it. A dizzying career awaited our girl there. I was sure of it. One day I was late and didn't pick up Hannah from the design center on time. Pamela continued. The girl had to wait for me outside the gate for a while. She could have stayed on the grounds of the center. There are comfortable benches, a cozy fountain. Apparently the girl was just curious to see another life, which she had only heard about. She wanted to see what it was like behind the gates. At the same time, a good-looking guy and his friends were passing by. Seeing a pretty girl, obviously waiting for someone, he stopped and fell behind his own. A conversation ensued between the young people, in the course of which sympathy arose. For Hannah, it was all new, unusual, like an adventure. Pamela shook her head. We didn't know anything and they started dating. Then it turned out that Hannah was purposely making up extra classes at the design center. I'd take her to it with peace of mind, and she'd run out of the gate and go for a walk with him. In the fall, the boy was taken away to the army. Dating stopped by itself, but by New Year's Eve it became clear that Hannah is expecting a child. I noticed the belly. I had seen it before, but I did not even think about it. How? The girl gained a little weight, it's nothing. And closer to the new year, there is no doubt. I talked to Hannah. She confessed everything. I yelled at my daughter for the first time then. My sons and my husband tried to calm me down, but I kept going on and on. I dreamed so much about my daughter. I had so many plans and hopes for her. A talented girl, an excellent student, ahead of her studies in London. And to ruin her future like that, to embarrass herself and her parents. I couldn't take it. We tried to find this guy's parents so we could give the baby to them. But either Hannah was hiding it from us, or she really didn't know anything about him, except his name. She said it didn't matter to her. They were enjoying their youth, the great weather, each other, and didn't ask each other for passport details. Gradually, a plan matured in my mind. No one was to know that Hannah was expecting a child. Now the girl was not let out of the house, not shown to anyone. I also made a deal with the people at the medical center. For a lot of money, they were to deliver the baby when it was due and then hand the baby over to the orphanage. I planned it well and even calmed down a bit. Pamela continued. But things went wrong. Hannah's labor started early, unexpectedly. The girl was patient to the last in her room, not wanting to draw attention to herself. And when she called for help, I've been a mom 3 times, so I knew perfectly well that the doctors wouldn't get to us in time. Because Hannah was about to give birth, Pamela shook her head. I had to do everything myself with the help of the maid. She was a good, faithful girl, of course. But it was I, Emily, who first held you in my arms. Oh my God. So you think I'm Hannah's daughter? The girl said. I'm sure you do, Pamela nodded. There are many things about you that remind me of her, and your story confirms it. It's going to be hard for me to go on. Try to understand me. I was a terrible person back then, tough, controlling. I didn't realize that money, which by the way I didn't even earn, is no reason to despise others, and energy should be directed to good deeds. I would never do that now. With a tiny baby in her arms, Pamela was confused, and then Hannah started to feel sick. The girl lost consciousness. The woman was afraid for her daughter's life. As long as her girl was all right, the rest does not matter. So the newfound grandmother wrapped the baby in a blanket, handed the girl to the maid, and told her to do what she wanted with her, threw her in an orphanage. Threw her in the woods, as long as not a single thread did not lead to their family. Unfortunately, Fred wasn't home. He would have stopped me. I was scared out of my wits, the maid promised. For a good reward, she carried the infant away and said she'd dropped it off on the orphanage's doorstep. It turned out that no one had been dropped off there that day. She was lying, as I later found out when I realized what I had done and threw everything I had into the search. The night her granddaughter was born, Pamela was only relieved when the infant was carried away. Hannah came to her senses, and the first thing she asked about was her daughter. When she realized she was gone, she threw a tantrum, sobbing, smashing dishes, breaking furniture, venting her emotions. Pamela was then frightened. It seemed to her that her daughter had gone mad, unable to bear the shock. Strong medication prescribed by a doctor saved the situation. Hannah pulled herself together, but became detached, indifferent. She was no longer happy about anything. Even the upcoming study in London, of which she dreamed so much it was already a completely different person. "But I thought I was doing the right thing," Pamela said regretfully. "I thought it would be better for everyone, but fate quickly proved me wrong." The next summer, as planned, the whole family saw Hannah off to the airport. The girl was waiting for training with the best specialists and a brilliant career. Pamela was proud of her daughter and herself. After all, she managed to successfully cope with the problem. Thanks to her mother, Hannah started her life with a clean slate. "The plane crashed," Pamela said quietly, her face darkening, as if she were reliving the nightmare. "No one survived. The only thing Ben said then was if we'd kept the baby, Hannah wouldn't have gotten on that flight. She would have stayed home for a couple more years, taking care of her daughter. I've spent my whole life blaming myself for that. He thought it was our punishment for betraying him." For years, Pamela couldn't find a place for herself. Nothing interested her. Nothing touched her. It was as if the meaning of life had disappeared, and only the marriage of her sons and the birth of grandchildren made her come to her senses. "The kids shook me up, brought me to my senses," she said. "I realized how much attention and warmth they need, what happiness it is. And I realized that I had to find you, to find Hannah's daughter, my eldest granddaughter. It's the only way I can at least partially redeem myself. And I wanted to see you, to see what you've become, to help you make it in life, after all, just to be there for you." Pamela began her search with the orphanage where a maid, Mariah, had allegedly dropped off a newborn baby. But she quickly found out that the baby had never been there. Mariah was never able to find out the truth. She passed away shortly after the whole story. Pamela didn't give up. She hired the best detectives, searched for information herself. But as the years went by, there were no leads. The woman didn't even want to think that Mariah had done something terrible. Just left the child somewhere in the cold in the woods, so that no one would find it, as she herself had advised her. True, the maid didn't seem like such a cruel person. But who knows? "Now I see how it was said," Pamela thoughtfully. "Of course you do. Mariah took you to Jennifer. Why didn't I realize that?" Jennifer was a single, childless woman who worked in Pamela's house. One day, she ruined her new linens. It was expensive. It was covered in ugly stains because the washing machine malfunctioned. But Pamela didn't want to hear about it at the time. She was still enjoying the sudden wealth that had suddenly fallen on her head, feeling all-powerful. And so she fired Jennifer without remorse. Yes, she was living somewhere in the city, renting an apartment. Pamela nodded. "I know she had some health problems that made it impossible for her to have children, even though she wanted them. She knew that very well. So she gave you to her. It was the right thing to do. Logical. She was a good mother to me." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "A really good one. And I miss her. I'm grateful to Jennifer for you. I wish I could thank her in person. I also wish Ben had lived to see this moment. It's only 3 years away. How happy would he be now?" Grandmother and granddaughter looked at each other in silence. Emily couldn't understand her feelings, a cloud of thoughts swarming in her head. And then Pamela covered Emily's hand with her palm, and the gesture made everything easy to understand. A pleasant warmth spread through Emily's body, and in the soul suddenly began to fill a void that the girl had never known existed before. "Everything will be all right now," Pamela smiled. "I am so sorry to you, but we'll make up for it. You're not alone now." "Yes," Emily nodded. And the tears she had been holding back finally broke through. For the first time in years, she felt needed, loved, and most importantly, loved.